Sup, my fellas. Don't forget to leave feedback, and enjoy the story. This guy was a real superhuman. No one could control monsters like he did it. The protagonist restrained the monster's power with a single snap of his fingers. With his divine power, it was easy. People around him were terrified of his skills, considering him a protective god. And it all began 100 million years ago. A catastrophe struck the planet, destroying all of humanity. A strange virus began to mutate, animals turning into monsters. The survivors waged war, but the strength of ordinary soldiers was insufficient. So, people began conducting experiments. And only Jean showed worthy results. He set about saving the remaining people. But when there was no one left to protect, MC decided to transfer his abilities to the future. He was frozen in a capsule, while the world slowly recovered with the help of the nanomachines. Finally, brighter days arrived, and the assistants rushed to defrost the hero. Their leader pushes forward despite fear, driven by the hope that the place they seek is real. A black, red-eyed beast closes in on them, turning their desperate run into a race for survival. The group gambles everything on finding a being said to dwell in these ruins, because without him they have no chance. When one of them senses a presence ahead, their desperation turns into urgent hope. The girl clutches her pendant and commits herself to that last belief. She realizes they have reached the domain of the guardian god they were seeking. The three enter a sealed chamber convinced that their only salvation must be inside. But when the door opens, they are met not by rescue, but by an empty room. Their hope falters as they discover the chamber appears to be a dead end. The girl freezes, refusing to let that conclusion be final. Before they can decide what to do, the pursuing beast crashes in above them and corners them. With her companions collapsing in fear, the girl makes a direct plea to the unseen protector. She begs the guardian god to save them, putting all her faith into that cry. Her plea is answered as a pillar of light descends and strikes the beast. The attack tears through the monster and shatters the chamber's stillness. As the danger is removed, the children realize their faith was justified after all. From the broken chamber, a man steps out barefoot, newly awakened after unimaginable time. He emerges fully conscious, already grasping that he has awakened into one of the futures once left to chance. Recognizing the storage unit as Kagura's work, he finds the clothes that had been prepared for him long ago. At the control station, he confirms the staggering truth that he now stands in a world 100 million years beyond his own era. Most records have decayed beyond use, making the survival of this facility itself remarkable. From the remaining evidence, he infers that the nanomachines once released into the atmosphere likely shaped what became of Earth. Wanting to understand the fate of the world, he decides to rely on the few traces Kagura left behind. Once dressed, he turns to the stunned children and asks them to explain the world he has awakened into. Their shock is broken by his dry admission that he has effectively spent 100 million years naked. He settles into his restored identity with calm confidence. Satisfied with the clothes left for him, he presents himself as someone fully returned from the past. He opens the massive vault and steps toward the outside world at last. Blinding daylight greets them, and both the children and the awakened man brace themselves for what lies beyond. Seeing the world outside, he begins to understand how completely time has remade everything. He looks out over a lush landscape and faces the reality of Earth 100 million years later. The children revere him as their guardian god, while he takes in a world utterly transformed from the one he left behind. A young villager leads two outsiders deeper into the forest, insisting they follow quickly. The silver-haired man studies the situation in silence, already assessing what these people are. He realizes the villagers are supposed to be humans, even though humanity should have gone extinct 100 million years earlier. Seeing their animal traits, he concludes they must be another species that evolved to resemble humans. He refines that theory by suspecting nanomachines altered them instead. Their language matching his own era convinces him there is still some hidden connection, and he finally decides to introduce himself. The girl gives her name as Jean, and the man identifies himself as Shido Jean while allowing her to call him Jean. The other two villagers introduce themselves as Hakama Phil, Danpa, and Shandy. As they near their destination, the silver-haired man presses Jean to explain what she expects from him. She answers plainly that they brought him here to defeat the corruptors, leaving him to question what those are. Before anyone can explain properly, Shandy is struck by sudden dread. That fear is justified when they arrive to find the village engulfed in flames. Shandy bolts toward the destruction to find his parents, while Jean tries to stop him and follows after. The silver-haired man pauses, watching the panic unfold while withholding judgment. As he enters the village, he notes crude wooden barricades amid the burning streets. The children race ahead through rows of wooden houses as the fire spreads around them. Following behind, he concludes this civilization is far from advanced. Jean suddenly freezes, having spotted something worse than the fire. An elderly woman is locked in a desperate struggle with a monstrous creature, and Jean recognizes her grandmother in danger. The old woman is shocked that Hakama returned instead of staying away from the attack. The silver-haired man focuses on the monster and realizes this must be the corruptor they meant. Its appearance matches the creatures he knows as corruptors, confirming the term survived into this era. Ignoring orders to flee, Hakama refuses to abandon his grandmother and resolves to save her himself. The silver-haired man moves in, wanting to verify the creature before committing further. He strikes the corruptor with overwhelming force and tears it away from the old woman. Without ceremony, he scoops the grandmother out of danger and carries her clear. As the beast recovers, Hakama gathers power in his hands, and the old woman urges him to attack. Hakama forms a blazing fireball, revealing an ability the outsider did not expect. He launches the fireball straight into the corruptor as it spits flame back at him. The blast lands cleanly and blows through the monster's body. Watching the corpse fail to regenerate, the silver-haired man concludes Hakama's attack somehow suppressed the nanomachine-based healing. That result makes him wonder if the boy manipulated nanomachines in the atmosphere. He recalls that such controls should only be possible for compatible humans, deepening the mystery. When he asks whether everyone in this era can use that kind of fire, the grandmother explains that only a few can. She calls it divine power, and he realizes that is what this village uses to describe control over nanomachines. Jean rushes to her grandmother and anxiously asks what happened to the other villagers. The grandmother says she already evacuated them, but Danpa immediately demands to know why Hakama came back at all. The old woman agrees, insisting the village is already lost and not worth risking more lives for. She warns them that the creature they just killed was only the beginning. What they defeated, she explains, was merely a newborn larva. If left alone, such larvae mature into giant corruptors capable of destroying entire cities. At that point, armed villagers arrive and scold the old woman for trying to handle even a larval corruptor alone. One of them, Garrus, boasts that a creature like that would have been easy for him to kill himself. He reassures her that the villagers were sent safely to shelter. Jean is relieved to find her father alive and asks where Hakama went when he was missing from the shelter. The grandmother reveals that Hakama went to the sealed door, horrifying her because it is a forbidden place. Jean explains that her grandmother told her a being beyond that door is this village's god and that bringing him here would save them. The grandmother is stunned to realize the supposed savior Jean brought back is this ordinary-looking man. Seeing him properly, she doubts he is any kind of god at all. Garrus laughs off the idea entirely, treating the claim as a joke. The silver-haired outsider scoffs at the idea that a so-called inferior species could be this land's guardian god. A frightened child tries to stop the insult by revealing that the outsider is speaking about their guardian deity. Sarles dismisses the warning at once, deciding the stranger's animal ears prove he is just another lesser being. He doubles down, claiming the outsider's presence means nothing and denying that their guardian god was ever defeated by a corruptor. Boasting to the villagers, Sarles insists the threat is only a larva and that he can kill it in a single strike. The outsider finally intervenes, his tone turning cold as he demands to be heard. Sarles rejects him outright, declaring this a village matter and making it clear that outsiders of his kind are not welcome. He turns his back on the stranger and warns him not to interfere. Ignoring the concern around him, Sarles heads out alone, convinced he is about to slay the huge corruptor himself. He leaves the others behind with contempt, telling them to stay trembling while he handles the monster. The elders can only watch in frustration, fearing his recklessness will get him killed. The outsider remains silent, weighing the situation instead of arguing further. At last the village elder swallows her distrust, thanks him for helping earlier, and asks him to escort the women and children to shelter. Rather than hide, she resolves to follow Sarles herself and risk her life beside him. The outsider refuses her request, unwilling to be ordered into retreat. A young girl brightens at his answer, taking it as proof that he has pride of his own. He accepts that reading and makes his stance clear. He will not let anyone brand him an inferior species and die for it. Out at the water, the supposed larva reveals itself as a towering serpent-like corruptor rising from the sea. The creature churns the water around itself, radiating the scale of the danger Sarles underestimated. Even so, Sarles marches straight toward it and openly challenges the monster. He proclaims himself the one who will bear the country's future and rise as a holy knight. From that conviction, he decides that an invader like this must be put down by his own hand. Charging his spear with lightning, Sarles launches himself into a direct assault. His attack tears into the creature's flesh and eye, drawing a gruesome response. The damaged parts split away, and the monster begins producing smaller bodies from the severed mass. Sarles is suddenly surrounded as the corruptor multiplies into several attacking forms. He cuts through the swarm with rapid electrified strikes, forcing a path toward the main body. Seeing an opening, he commits to ending the fight with one decisive blow. He accelerates in a straight line, gambling everything on a finishing charge. Sarles drives his spear into the monster with all his power. Certain he has won, he presses the attack with fierce confidence. The huge corruptor recoils violently under the impact, seeming to collapse under the damage, but the wound closes almost immediately, revealing that the creature can regenerate. Sarles realizes too late that his supposed killing blow accomplished almost nothing. Before he can recover, the monster lashes back and catches him in its counterattack. Stunned and off balance, he braces for the end without understanding what can still save him. The outsider appears beside the beast and unleashes a hexagonal barrier-like force with one hand, casually asking if the monster feels better now. Sarles can only stare, shocked that the man he dismissed has stepped into the battle. With effortless control, the outsider halts the creature's charge and dominates the battlefield in an instant. He notes calmly that the corruptor is still alive, treating the crisis as manageable. Then, with a small motion of his fingers, he prepares a follow-up attack. A golden force slams through the monster's body, blasting it apart despite its size. Saros is left gaping as the outsider orders everyone to move away at once. He shouts for Celise and the others to run, making sure the villagers clear the area immediately. The fleeing villagers stop in disbelief, unable to process what they just witnessed. The elder is equally stunned, struggling to understand how the battle turned so completely. What leaves the deepest impression is that the outsider overpowered that enormous body with a single hand. The outsider remarks that the strain is starting to build and decides they should withdraw for now. Before Saros can protest, the outsider grabs him and pulls him along. He carries Saros out of the danger zone in one swift movement as the shattered corruptor thrashes behind them. The silver-haired man pulls the wounded beastkin youth out of danger as the battle continues across the flooded ground. When the youth demands to know what he is, the man stays focused on the enemy instead of answering directly. He explains that the monsters regenerate almost instantly, so ordinary damage means little. What matters is stopping that regeneration by disrupting the nanomachines that sustain them, the force this world mistakes for divine power. The youth struggles to grasp that explanation, hearing for the first time that the god's power has another origin. The man judges his last strike effective but too shallow, since the wound closed before it could matter. Shaken, the youth wonders if the man is truly some guardian god, while the man dismisses any such idea. Instead, he turns the conversation back to responsibility, saying there's something important he needs to make clear. He confirms that the youth had called this outbreak the village's problem. The youth tries to justify himself, insisting that was exactly why he acted, because leaving it alone would have been wrong. The man cuts him off and claims the burden for himself, declaring that these creatures are his problem. Before the youth can process that, another corruptor lunges up from the water with renewed ferocity. The man dashes across the shallows, drawing the monster's whipping limbs away from the others. As he moves, he settles on the method he needs: immobilize them first. He narrowly evades a crushing strike that blasts the water apart where he stood. The creature keeps thrashing and tearing up the battlefield, proving how dangerous it remains while mobile. Watching helplessly, the youth bitterly admits these monsters exist because his people once made a foolish mistake. The man answers that realization by gathering crackling energy into his hand. He accepts the blame as someone tied to that ancient era, saying he too comes from the time when this all began. With power building around him, he declares that he is the one who must settle this. The youth still cannot fully understand him, but the man's calm certainty makes clear that he intends to finish the fight himself. He reveals that he is the product of countless iterations, a being refined through repeated attempts. Those attempts were born from humanity's long history of war and violence. Science and bloodshed eventually converged into the project that created him. He identifies himself as the last human ever made. Then he unleashes a massive beam of energy straight into the monster. The corruptor is caught completely off guard as the blast engulfs it. Its body is erased under the concentrated strike before it can regenerate. The attack continues upward in a towering column, overwhelming everything in its path. The villagers can only stare as the impossible scale of his power becomes undeniable. For at least one of them, fear gives way to open hope and admiration. The beam punches beyond the world itself, showing just how far his weaponized power reaches. When the light finally fades, the battlefield is left eerily calm around a scorched, glowing impact site. The youth is left speechless, realizing he has witnessed something far beyond anything he imagined. The man stands over the quiet water and finishes his explanation, calling himself the last. A scientific weapon, not a god. As the scene settles, an unseen observer nearby begins to react to what she has just witnessed. Hidden in the brush, a royal investigator recalls that she came to examine reports of new invaders near Kodama village. Seeing the silver-haired man's power firsthand, she realizes she has stumbled onto something unbelievable, possibly involving the royal capital's famed captain. Her shock quickly turns into excitement as she understands the scale of what she has discovered. Convinced this news is too important to sit on, she decides the capital must be informed at once. Later, the man receives a recorded message addressed to him by name. The message begins with a grim premise. If he is hearing it, the sender is probably already dead. The scientist delivering it undercuts the drama with a joke, showing a familiar ease with the man despite the ominous setup. He speaks from the distant past, wondering whether the future has become cleaner and more stable as expected. But he immediately warns that one critical problem remains unresolved. Dropping all preamble, he prepares to explain the danger plainly. Even if the world recovers environmentally, he says, the corruptors themselves are unlikely to disappear. The man listens in silence, recognizing the weight of that conclusion. The scientist explains that he first noticed something was wrong roughly 1,000 years after the man's era began. The scientist explains that he repeatedly entered cold sleep so he could wake across the ages and observe how the world was changing. From orbit, he saw the environment gradually improve and the number of corruptors steadily decline. But one region remained dangerously abnormal, showing that the threat had not truly disappeared. His surveillance eventually found a new evolved being standing over a fallen beast, proof that something more advanced had emerged. The creature's appearance confirmed that corruptors were no longer just mindless monsters but developing into far more dangerous forms. The discovery hit like a grim conclusion. Evolution had opened a new stage of the crisis. He tells Jean that as the world changed, evolved corruptors began to appear. Unable to predict what forms they would take, He judged that these new beings would inevitably become a major threat. Since he could not eliminate them himself, he focused on altering newly born lifeforms so they could resist the corruptors at least a little. He strengthened select people through modification, creating fighters capable of pushing back against the threat. He adds that he also left some power behind specifically for Jean. Jean realizes the scientist means the strange power source he has been carrying. He confirms it by holding up the glowing injector. The scientist instructs him to inject it, explaining that the nanomachines will teach his body how to use the power. Once activated, the modifications awaken a force only Jean can wield because he alone is fully compatible with the nanomachines. Jean studies his hands in silence as he feels the change settle into him. He discovers he can now generate objects directly from the nanomachines. Testing the ability with the conjured blade, he quickly grasps how practical this new power will be. The scientist reveals that he hid similar power-ups in research labs scattered across the world. He spread them out so the corruptors could not destroy everything at once if they found one site. More importantly, he wanted Jean to travel the world and witness what the distant future had become. As Jean rides on with companions through this changed land, the scientist admits he still cannot predict what kinds of threats the future will produce. Even so, he believes the world is in a far better state than the ruined age they came from. The journey continues into ordinary life, where people can now move freely without the constant desperation of the old era. That contrast is clearest in the carefree joy of a girl running and laughing, living a life that would once have been impossible. Jean sees peaceful towns rebuilt around open public spaces instead of survival bunkers. He also sees learning and culture thriving again, signs that civilization has recovered beyond mere endurance. Satisfied, the scientist tells him to enjoy this new world first. His image begins to break up as he admits he will not be able to stay with Jean much longer. Accepting his end, he says he cannot personally see this story through to its conclusion. Jean listens quietly, taking in the weight of the farewell. The scientist entrusts the future of the world to Jean by name. Jean accepts that responsibility, and almost immediately the local children rush in, hailing him as their guardian deity. They excitedly explain that everyone has been searching for him and drag him back toward the village. The children insist the celebration cannot begin without its main attraction, making clear how central Jean has become to them. Though reserved, Jean softens at their affection and follows. On the way, he notices a pendant on the girl and recognizes it as a key connected to one of the old labs. He asks where she got it, and she innocently shows him the pendant. She explains that a long-ago great figure entrusted it to her clan, and it has been passed down for generations. Jean realizes that as long as the village protected that heirloom, they were unknowingly safeguarding access to the lab. Grateful, he reflects that he owes the villagers more than he realized. They arrive at a lively village bonfire where the community is gathered in celebration. People call for others to come quickly, spreading the excitement through the crowd. When Jean appears with the children, the villagers recognize him at once as the guardian deity they have been waiting for. Jean is amused by how highly they speak of him, especially when they compare him favorably to the monster he defeated. Nearby villagers excitedly retell the fight, marveling that someone so unimposing could really have beaten such a creature. The noise of the gathering swells as more people notice him. One villager loudly defends Jin's strength, insisting outsiders cannot judge him by appearance alone. The crowd's admiration only grows, with the children proudly praising Jin while others joke that his reputation and his looks do not quite match. Amid the celebration, a newcomer arrives and calls out that this is where Jin has been. A village man and his grandmother approach the silver-haired stranger to thank him again for saving their home. They make clear that without his help the village would have been destroyed, and they want to repay what they owe him. He dismisses any need for repayment. When they insist on giving him something, he asks not for goods but for information. Specifically, he wants to know the current state of the world, which catches the villagers off guard. The grandmother decides the best place to find answers is the royal capital. She explains that Kermosia, where the king lives, gathers many kinds of people and should have the most reliable knowledge about the world. She adds that people from the nearby village of Higadama often travel there to sell special wood and silkworm goods. Although the road is dangerous, she believes the guardian deity should be able to make the trip safely, even if she does not know the exact route. She volunteers a local child named Hakama, who already has business in the capital, to serve as his guide. The child has apparently been to the capital before and can also help restrain the stranger's overwhelming power if needed. By morning, the quiet mountain village is at peace again. The stranger greets the new day with unusual calm, savoring the fresh air. The beauty of the morning makes him reflect on how unexpected this peaceful world feels. He wishes Kagura could have seen this scene too, revealing that someone important to him is absent. Hakama arrives with clothes for the guardian deity, still treating him with reverence. The child awkwardly urges him to get dressed before they leave. As the village gathers around them, the departure becomes a small communal send-off. The grandmother formally entrusts Hakama with guiding the guardian deity properly. A brash young villager complains that he wanted to learn from the guardian deity himself, only to be shut down for lacking the discipline to do so. The silver-haired man lightly praises that youth's effort from the previous day and confirms he is heading for the capital. The youth immediately blurts out that he will be waiting there, eager to prove himself through study. His loud promise turns the farewell into a hopeful pledge for the future. Hakama receives a final reminder to stay safe and healthy on the journey. With everyone waving them off, the pair finally set out for the royal capital. As they travel, Hakama keeps pace beside him, and the journey quickly settles into a quiet companionship. They continue along riverside roads through the countryside, putting distance between themselves and the village. By sunset they stop near a waterfall, where Hakama tends to simple tasks while he watches over the camp. The child points out the road ahead, still focused on getting them to the capital. That night by the fire, Hakama asks how much farther they still have to go. He estimates 4 more days, and the answer reassures Hakama that the capital is closer than expected. Once the practical talk ends, Hakama timidly asks why he wants to know so much about the world. He first avoids the question by calling it a secret. Then his thoughts turn serious as he recalls Kagura's warning that corruptors do not simply disappear. He remembers that corruptors are a real threat in this world as well, not just in the one he knew. What troubles him is that such creatures should only arise in heavily polluted places, yet the environment here seems nothing like that. From that contradiction, he realizes that something in this era has begun to change. Hakama notices the darkness in his expression, and he softens, apologizing for drifting into grim thoughts. He concludes that at least some people in this age are still living without being overtaken by corruptors. That leads him to a new plan. First understand how people in this era live, then deal with the corruptors. He decides the threat can be investigated gradually instead of confronted all at once. The conversation turns lighter when Hakama asks to stop calling him guardian deity, and he allows the child to simply call him Jin. Their rest is abruptly interrupted by the sound of horses approaching in the night. Both of them look up as riders arrive at their campfire. A young armored man politely apologizes for disturbing them. He approaches with an armed group behind him and asks for a moment of Jin's time. The newcomer carries himself with the authority of someone important. Jin responds cautiously and demands to know who he is. The rider identifies himself as Argus Walton, a royal capital knight and captain of the 7th Division. Hearing that, Jin immediately wonders whether these holy knights are the people he has been looking for. A beast-eared female knight bristles with anger before confronting the strangers. She lashes out at them for remaining seated and treats their posture alone as disrespect toward her captain. As she moves to escalate, her captain immediately recognizes that she is targeting the same suspicious pair they had noticed earlier and orders her to stop. The blonde captain smooths things over, apologizes for his subordinate's behavior, and politely asks the strangers to speak with him. The silver-haired man steps forward calmly while the captain explains that his subordinate had reacted rudely to them. Before anything else, the captain demands to know where they came from and where they are headed. A young village girl answers that they came from Kodama village and are traveling to the royal capital. Hearing that, the hostile knight reacts as if her suspicion has just been confirmed. She dismounts and declares that she expected these two to be the culprits. She accuses them of lying because, according to her, Kodama village keeps strict records and would not contain anyone matching them. The silver-haired man quietly realizes that this country tracks births and identities closely, making false origins easy to expose. But the captain cuts off his subordinate's certainty with a flat refusal. He points out that the girl's clothing is genuine Kodama cloth, a fabric produced in that village and traded even in the capital. He adds that children's garments from Kodama are especially rare, so her claim is likely true despite his subordinate's objection. Even so, he raises his sword and signals that one issue remains unresolved. He singles out the silver-haired man as the true anomaly. The man's unfamiliar clothing marks him as someone from outside their known world or lands. The captain explains that bandits on the road to the capital have been using children as decoys to rob travelers. He warns that the pair fit that pattern and says he cannot ignore the possibility that they are criminals hiding behind innocence. The girl desperately denies the accusation, but the captain makes clear that judgment belongs to the knights, not to her. The beast-eared knight eagerly backs the captain's hard line. Cornered, the girl gathers magical power in her hand and prepares to fight. The captain instantly reads her intent. With a calm warning against foolishness, he unleashes divine power that surrounds and suppresses her before she can attack. She is stunned to realize he wields holy power, and the silver-haired man notes that this confirms they are holy knights. Held at bay by the captain's power, the girl can only watch as the silver-haired man remains composed. The captain acknowledges the threat level in front of him and tightens his stance. He points his blade at the silver-haired man and demands a truthful answer about his origin, warning that the response will decide everything. He states plainly that if the answer is wrong, he will kill him on the spot. The silver-haired man meets the threat in silence, showing no fear. For the first time, the captain feels pressure from the man standing before his sword. Then the silver-haired man casually claims that he came from Kodama village after all. His absurd answer shocks the hostile knight, who cannot believe he would say it so lightly. Instead of reacting with anger, the captain lowers his weapon and decides to test the claim another way. He turns to the girl and asks whether the man is telling the truth. Nervous but decisive, she says he is Jin, the guardian deity of Kodama village. The title catches the captain's attention, and he accepts the answer after a brief pause. With that, he asks Jin if their business is concluded, and Jin agrees. The captain remounts, apologizes again for the rough treatment, and frames it as an unavoidable part of his duty. Learning that Jin is also bound for the royal capital, he predicts they will meet again. He offers future help if Jean runs into trouble, hoping that such aid might repay tonight's discourtesy. Having settled the matter, he prepares to depart, leaving his subordinate baffled by how abruptly he has relented. Jean watches them go with a faint, knowing smile. As the knights ride off down the mountain road, the besteared subordinate protests that the captain should not have backed down. She insists the strangers were obviously suspicious and keeps clinging to her prejudice against them. Her words make the captain reflect on who truly looked lesser in that encounter. He quietly wonders whether his own side had been the inferior one after all, confusing his subordinate. Their teal-haired companion agrees with his conclusion. She asks whether the others failed to notice the obvious truth. What she means is simple. The gap in power between their group and Jean was overwhelming. The blonde holy knight admits that even after striking the silver-haired man 3 times, he never truly managed to engage him. He keeps his sword leveled at the stranger, trying to force an answer from someone who still shows no fear. The knight tightens his grip, preparing for another attempt. But the silver-haired man casually reaches into his coat instead of reacting like someone under threat. He reveals that before he could even test his own strength, the knight had already been neutralized. The standoff makes clear that the knight's blade means nothing against him. Elsewhere, a knight asks whether their captain used divine power, and the answer is yes. A second knight realizes with alarm that the power never even activated. She compares it to the earlier girl's case and concludes the spirits refused to lend their power this time as well. Her companion confirms the same thing happened to her, raising the fear that this is something far beyond a normal failure. As they ride, they conclude there is an overwhelming gap in base divine power between that man and ordinary holy knights. The blonde captain narrows the possibilities and suspects only the grand captain could match someone like that. The realization leaves the group tense and frustrated as they continue on horseback. One knight admits she never sensed the danger at all. The captain tells her that is only because the man is too abnormal to judge by ordinary standards. Their thoughts turn to the corruptor from Kodama village, and they suspect the same man may have been involved there too. Although one knight worries about leaving such a person alone, the captain decides the stranger did not seem openly hostile and should simply be watched for now. The teal-haired knight redirects everyone to their real priority, reaching the royal capital without further delay. The captain entrusts the village's aftermath and the reward for the bandit subjugation to his subordinates while he keeps moving toward the capital. On the way, he considers that if the mysterious man could be turned into an ally, he might become valuable to the kingdom. He sees that possibility as a potential answer to the major troubles facing the country. The next day, the silver-haired traveler tells the young girl accompanying him that he met someone interesting yesterday. When she asks whether all royal capital knights are that strong, he explains that the one they met was exceptional. He clarifies that among knights, only the elite are accepted into the holy knights. The girl repeats the point, beginning to grasp how rare that level of power is. He adds that the way that knight activated spirit magic was on an entirely different level, prompting her to explain what spirit magic is. She describes it as borrowing the strength of spirits, which people in this age call divine power, to perform techniques. He immediately reframes the idea through his own knowledge and concludes that this era treats nanomachines as spirits. To him, the whole system confirms that in this age, science has been mistaken for fantasy. He recalls the rabbit-eared knight's contemptuous use of the term inferior species. That phrase catches his attention more than the fight itself. He repeats it aloud, signaling that he has started connecting it to something larger about this world. The girl explains that many different species exist in this era. She says some resemble fish while others are closer to insects. According to old stories, long ago there were only limited places where people could survive. She continues that everyone eventually changed into bodies suited to the regions they could live in. He interprets that as adaptation driven by environment. That leads him to a darker possibility. Some survivors from long ago may have endured, while humanity itself evolved into these new forms. He cuts off the thought before pursuing it further, but the girl still wonders whether that would mean those who failed to change were left behind. She explains that those called inferior species are viewed as people who did not adapt and are considered lesser than the changed races. Worse, she adds that many of those so-called inferior species are sold as slaves. She cannot understand why a physical difference should justify treating someone as fundamentally different. Hearing all this, he concludes that the society around them is insane. At the same time, he recognizes the girl's compassion and tells her she is a good person. Their walk is interrupted when someone suddenly rushes toward them from ahead on the road. A desperate voice begs for help, drawing both of their attention. A battered blue-haired girl stumbles forward and pleads with them before collapsing. The young companion runs to her side, immediately trying to check whether she is still conscious. The silver-haired man kneels in as well, his calm broken by concern. Up close, they see the blue-haired girl is badly bruised, exhausted, and barely breathing. As consciousness returns, Jean fixates on his ears, as if confirming something important about himself. He lies bruised and barely breathing on the ground while the young besteared girl beside him panics over his condition. A white-haired traveler assesses Jin's battered state and recognizes the injuries as severe. The girl helps Jean sit up and urgently checks whether he can still respond. The traveler steps in to heal him, calmly preparing some kind of restorative power. Instead of accepting help, Jean suddenly realizes something is wrong. The traveler sharply orders him not to move, revealing control rather than concern. Jean seizes the girl and puts a blade to her throat, threatening to kill her if the traveler advances. The standoff freezes as Jean uses the hostage to keep the supposed rescuer at a distance. The traveler remains composed and immediately understands the situation. Jean exposes the deception, recognizing the rescue attempt as a trap. The traveler concludes that if Jean saw through it, then the hidden enemies must already be nearby. Invisible figures begin to reveal themselves, confirming that an ambush had been waiting around them. Their leader appears and praises Popple for carrying out the setup successfully. The bandits openly admit they used stealth camouflage exactly as planned to lure the pair in. The white-haired man explains the trick to himself, a nanomachine function that bends surrounding imagery to make someone seem transparent. He notes the camouflage fails while moving, but the attackers used it skillfully, and the bandits start probing his origin while mocking his clothes and species. The leader presses a sword to the white-haired man's chest and warns him to stay still. At the same time, Jean is reminded that any movement on his part will cost the girl her life. The girl tries to use a glowing power of her own, but Jean reacts in alarm before she can act. The white-haired man urgently calls for Hakama to stop. Hakama hesitates, frightened and unsure whether to obey or fight. Even with a blade at him, the white-haired man firmly tells her that her power must never be turned on people. She wants to object, but his command leaves her torn between fear and restraint. The bandit leader realizes the girl possesses holy power and sees their capture as an even greater prize. One of the bandits wonders whether the white-haired man can use that same power too. Before the question can go further, the white-haired man drives a kick into the bandit confronting him. The struck bandit recoils, furious that someone he considers beneath him dared fight back. His companion cuts him off, warning him not to damage valuable merchandise. The bandits argue over whether an inferior species could really possess holy power, while Jean and Hakama realize what kind of criminals they are. Hakama recognizes them as the slave traders the Holy Knight had warned about, and understands the danger they are in. The leader, irritated, unleashes an electric attack to subdue them and orders them to sleep. As the lightning closes in, Hakama realizes that if she is taken alive, she will be sold as a slave. Later, in darkness, the white-haired man wakes and calls out for Hakama, and Jean answers first. Hakama jolts awake in a barred cell, disoriented but immediately aware that they have been imprisoned. The white-haired man checks whether she is physically unharmed, and she says she is, though her concern goes beyond that. As he looks out through the bars at other cages, he asks where they have been brought. He identifies it as the base of the people who attacked them. Seeing many other captives, he concludes that others were seized the same way and gathered here. The prisoners around them are visibly injured and worn down, showing the brutality of the operation. One frightened captive trembles in silence, making the threat of enslavement feel immediate and real. Back in their cage, Hakama sits in uneasy silence, taking in both their confinement and his strange composure. She finally asks why he is nearly naked, and he explains that the slavers stripped him because his clothes were valuable, leaving only his underwear. When she says he is far too calm for their situation, he casually replies that he has spent most of his life with little clothing anyway. Hakama pushes past that, and demands to know why he did not resist when he should have been able to. She bluntly tells Jean that he ought to have defeated those men easily, forcing him into silence. Before he answers, voices at the entrance signal that someone is bringing another captive in, and wants the process finished quickly. Both Jean and Hakama turn toward the sound, bracing for whoever is about to appear. The blue-haired youth arrives carrying food and reveals that he is awake and apparently working with their captors. Hakama erupts in anger at seeing him there, while he bitterly invites her to hate him. The blue-haired girl admits she never expected forgiveness and accepts that she was wrong from the beginning. Her companion strains against the bars, furious and desperate at hearing that surrender. From inside the cage, the silver-haired prisoner unexpectedly calls the blue-haired girl kind. She recoils at that judgment, unable to reconcile it with her belief that she is a genuine villain. He explains that true villains do not hesitate over guilt or crave forgiveness, because they never question their cruelty. That assessment leaves the room silent as he rises and the others wait for what he will do next. He abruptly tears apart the cage with his bare hands, ending his captivity by force. The blue-haired girl freezes in shock as the prisoner proves he was never truly helpless. Now free, he faces her calmly, making it clear he had been waiting for this chance. The younger girl reveals she expected him to break out so they could speak without being overheard. The blue-haired girl realizes he has guessed she was acting under coercion and that someone important to her is being held. When she demands to know how he knew, he casually reveals he inferred it and begins using healing power on her injuries. He admits he was initially deceived too, but her wounds convinced him her role was forced rather than willing. He reasons that even a villain would not choose to injure herself like this, which is why he saw through the act. He concludes she obeyed only because her captors had leverage over her, and she can no longer deny it. The pressure breaks her composure as she struggles to speak the truth. At last she confesses that the hostage is her younger brother. She recalls the threat that he would be sold away to traders if she disobeyed. The terror of being separated from him forever still defines every choice she made. Through tears, she reveals their parents were murdered and that everything she did was to keep her brother alive. Hearing that, the silver-haired man's anger hardens as he understands who exploited her. He condemns those people as filth. The younger girl asks if he let himself be captured in order to save the blue-haired girl, and he implies that was only part of it. He says villains are like oil stains. If any trace remains, the corruption spreads again. As he continues, he warns that sparing even one villain only lets their influence grow elsewhere. Before he can finish, a guard at the door notices something is wrong. The silver-haired man instantly smashes the guard through the doorway, answering the interruption with overwhelming force. He steps through the ruined entrance as the dust settles, already taking control of the stronghold. With cold certainty, he declares that villains must be eradicated completely, down to the roots. He makes clear this conviction comes from experience deeper than anyone else's. His thoughts turn back to a distant past in a futuristic city, where his hatred of villains began. As a battered child, he stood alone in that harsh world, already marked by neglect and violence. He once admired heroes and longed for justice, inspired by stories of criminals being exposed. But standing in the city's emptiness, he began to see that idealism did not match reality. He realized early that the world around him was not protected by justice at all. To him, a society that claimed to need justice was still rotten at its core. He saw it as overflowing with trash-like people who preyed on the weak. When thugs seized him in the street, his only wish was to live an ordinary life free from them. Yet he understood that the environment he lived in would never allow that peace. So instead of enduring it, he chose to resist. He began crushing the people who tried to dominate him, turning their violence back on them. That retaliation escalated into ruthless killing as he tore through one enemy after another. He carried that same merciless logic upward, striking down powerful figures as well. In time, he was left sitting atop the bodies of those he had eliminated, having made slaughter his answer. Then one day, after all that bloodshed, someone finally approached him with a different explanation. He listened, worried but attentive, as that encounter interrupted the path he had been following. The man told him that he had simply been born into the wrong world. Back in the present, that same silver-haired man drags a defeated enemy down the corridor, as if clearing obstacles is routine. 2 more guards try to stop him, but their fear shows they already understand they are outmatched. With more bodies already strewn across the floor, someone demands to know his true objective. A wounded guard, already overwhelmed, demands to know how the intruder got inside. The silver-haired stranger answers only with a calm, confident smile. He moves first, hurling one guard aside and breaking the group's formation before they can react. One of the beast men catches the thrown body in shock, realizing too late that the attack is already on top of them. The intruder instantly closes the distance on the next armed guard, turning the fight into a one-sided rush. Another guard freezes in horror as his allies are crushed almost effortlessly. Standing over the fallen men, the stranger forces them to confront the fact that someone far beyond them has entered their hideout. One battered survivor can only stare and tremble as the intruder approaches. A scream from inside the building carries outside and alerts the people nearby that something has gone terribly wrong. The blue-haired girl recognizes the voice and immediately fears what is happening inside. When she asks who could be fighting for them, she is told it is a guardian god, a claim she can barely process. The explanation is simple. If Jean is handling it, they should be safe. Even as everyone is ordered outside, doubt remains over whether they are truly being rescued. That doubt centers on the trafficker inside, a man dangerous enough to wield crackling divine power. The blue-haired girl knows that his power is no bluff and worries brute strength alone will not be enough against him. Inside, the intruder reaches the same conclusion and realizes he cannot win by raw force alone. The trafficker, suddenly frightened, tries to stall for time and beg for a pause. Instead, the intruder seizes another guard and coldly asks what exactly this place is selling. Sensing a chance to survive, the trafficker hurriedly starts bargaining. He points to a cage of children and offers slaves as if they were merchandise. He even promises the intruder can take whichever child he wants. The offer is met with silence, which only makes the room more tense. At last the intruder cuts him off, making clear the bargaining has already failed. The trafficker panics when his spirit magic suddenly refuses to respond. The intruder's expression hardens as he notices the enemy's power has been shut down around him. The trafficker realizes the problem is not his own condition but the strange man standing before him. The intruder asks what kind of power he has, and the trafficker bitterly judges him as an amateur villain rather than a true monster. He explains that real predators would have fled the moment they sensed something this dangerous. The intruder understands the criticism. He underestimated his opponent and assumed victory too easily. The trafficker, seeing defeat coming, decides to abandon caution and use his last resort. He lunges for a hidden mechanism, choosing escalation over surrender. Even while cornered, he insists the fight is not over and slams the switch. A concealed door opens, revealing that he had prepared something far worse in reserve. Behind the barrier waits a massive horned invader, imprisoned until now as a weapon. The intruder turns toward it, and the trafficker boasts that this monster was specially obtained for a particular buyer. The invader breaks free, and the trafficker decides that if his hideout is ruined, he will at least drag the intruder down with it. He revels in the chaos, convinced he has regained control. The invader charges, and the trafficker promises the stranger will be torn apart. The monster swings with overwhelming force, trying to crush him in one blow. The intruder stays perfectly focused, reading the attack instead of flinching. He catches the strike head-on, stopping the invader's power with his bare body. The trafficker's confidence breaks the instant he sees the impossible happen. The intruder reveals that his body was born far beyond normal human limits. He explains that compared to ordinary people, his physical constitution is monstrously superior. Having proven brute force is not enough, he prepares to end the fight properly. This time he refuses to hold back against an invader and gathers divine power into his body. He unleashes that power as a concentrated blast that obliterates the monster. Thrown back by the aftermath, the trafficker realizes too late that his final weapon has been erased. Staring up at the man he tried to manipulate, he can only ask in disbelief why someone this strong can also use divine power. The intruder calmly leaves him with the only question that matters now: what will he do next? A captured man begs for mercy, terrified of what the silver-haired intruder will do to him. He desperately tries bargaining for his freedom, hoping fear and pleading might soften his captor. The answer is immediate and brutal as the intruder shuts him down with force. Once he has reclaimed his coat, the intruder calms himself and regains control of the situation. He confirms he has what he needs and leaves the beaten man cowering behind him. Turning to the children locked in a cage, he tells them to endure a little longer. He promises he will come back for all of them after he finishes what must be done first. He begins searching the room for evidence, deciding that rescuing them is not enough without proof of the criminal's wrongdoing. A hidden drawer yields documents, suggesting the kidnappers were keeping records they did not want found. The discovery confirms his suspicion that this place was tied to something larger than simple banditry. The papers appear to contain important information, but they are written in a script he cannot read. He briefly acts as if he has figured it out, masking the problem with confidence. Privately, he admits he understands none of it and cannot decipher a word. He decides he will need Hakamet to teach him later, while the defeated captive watches from the floor. Even without reading the text, he focuses on the bigger question of why these people were trying to capture an invader. To answer that, he uses his ability to pull data from the nanomachines and reconstruct what happened here. Surveillance feeds begin to appear around him as he accesses the local camera network. He narrows the search to footage from the past week, expecting it to reveal the kidnapper's purpose. As he watches, his attention sharpens when something important finally surfaces. The recovered memory shows the prisoners asking a noble figure why they are being held and what he intends to do with them. The noble refuses a full explanation but hints that he is willing to reveal one crucial truth. He declares that something significant is about to happen in this country, making the captives part of a larger scheme. The intruder silently absorbs this, recognizing that the kidnapping is tied to an upcoming event. The scene shifts to the town outside, where life continues normally despite the hidden conspiracy. Authorities and townspeople gather in the street as the aftermath of the bandits' capture spreads. Among the onlookers, a blue-haired young woman notices movement and turns toward it. Realization hits her at once when she recognizes who is coming. One of the rescued boys runs straight to her, calling out to his older sister while the silver-haired man follows behind. She rushes to meet him, overwhelmed by relief and emotion. The siblings cling to each other, and her gratitude spills out as she realizes he is safe. She thanks the man who brought the boy back, and he awkwardly brushes aside the reverence directed at him. With the reunion settled, he turns his attention back to the larger problem and asks about the people making arrests. He learns they are not agents of the local lord but guild staff called in to handle the bandits. The officials point out an older ram-horned man taking charge and identify him as the town's guild master. The guild master studies the silver-haired man closely, immediately sensing he is far from ordinary. When asked whether he was responsible for taking down the bandits, the silver-haired man answers plainly that he was. The guild master introduces himself as Padrak and formally thanks him for his cooperation. Even while being polite, Padrak continues measuring him with wary respect. From the lack of injuries and his calm bearing, Padrak concludes the stranger defeated many opponents with ease and must be exceptionally dangerous. He also explains that despite repeated complaints about this gang, no one under the Lord had acted against them. That leads the silver-haired man to question why the Lord did not simply order the bandits arrested. Padrak explains that in this land criminal enforcement belongs to the guild, whose members answer directly to the king rather than the local lord. He adds that even if the lord or his champion committed crimes, the guild would be obligated to report them upward. The silver-haired man translates the system into terms he understands. The lord is like a mayor, and the guild functions like the police. That comparison triggers his memory of the noble from the footage mentioning Chapayan, linking the conspiracy to the lord's champion. He thinks through the implication in silence, fitting the political structure to what he saw in the recording. He then presents the unread document, asking whether Padrak can make sense of what the bandits had been keeping. Padrak is startled when he realizes it is a list of the people who had dealings with the bandits. He immediately sees its value as evidence that could expose the entire network at once, prompting the silver-haired man to ask whether the local lord's name appears on it. Padrak denies that the lord is named, and the silver-haired man concludes that the true villain is not the lord but the champion behind the scheme. The silver-haired man admits the immediate crisis cannot be fixed, but he turns to what can still be decided. When asked about the freed slaves, the local authority explains that recognized victims of imprisonment or kidnapping will be protected by the guild until they can support themselves. He adds that anyone outside those categories will receive no help, leaving the blue-haired siblings in a precarious position. Realizing the two children have lost their parents, the silver-haired man presses for another option and asks whether any shelter can take them in. The answer is bleak. There are no shelters, and at best someone might help them look for work. Even that hope is undercut by prejudice, since their race is treated as inferior and likely to be shut out of employment. The silver-haired man notes bitterly that this city also ranks people by species. The older sister still wants to save her brother, but she sees no path forward if no one will hire them. That hopelessness sparks an idea in him. He asks whether they would go somewhere else if it meant work, and the girl eagerly agrees for both of them. He confirms that he already has a place in mind. He recalls a knight once telling him to come by if he ever needed help. With that memory, he decides on what he calls a very special workplace. The plan leads to the royal capital, specifically the Argus estate. At the estate, the blonde lord is jolted by the unexpected arrival and implication of what is being asked of him. When his companion notices his reaction, he brushes it off and privately frames the request as a sudden burden dropped into his lap. Even so, he immediately heads in to deal with it. He stops at the mansion and prepares to hand off his gear, signaling that duty comes before rest. Before parting from his returning party, he thanks them for the expedition and tells them to recover. He enters the estate at once, still in armor and carrying the matter with him. The household receives Lord Argus with formal deference. Without delay, he asks his staff whether anything urgent happened while he was away. Their uneasy expressions make it clear the answer is yes. He senses the tension immediately and asks what went wrong. The butler apologizes for troubling him before he has rested, but the lord insists on hearing it now. The butler leans in and delivers the report in private. From above, a woman watches as the confidential briefing continues below. She remains silent, observing the exchange with a guarded, unreadable interest. After hearing everything, Lord Argus thanks the butler and formally accepts the report. Left to process it, he realizes the situation has deteriorated far beyond what he expected. The report reveals that invaders have already appeared inside the royal capital itself, raising the alarming question of how they breached the city. He rejects the idea of an accident and concludes they were almost certainly let in on purpose. That suspicion points him toward the most restricted and politically dangerous place possible, Harnisk Academy. Even so, he decides he cannot let that stop him. Meanwhile, the silver-haired man gathers the children and sets out, saying he has a destination in mind. 3 days after the bandit incident, the 4 travelers continue toward the capital together. On the road, the blue-haired girl anxiously wonders whether someone like her could really find work there, and he tells her not to worry. He reassures her that because she can read, write, and handle numbers, she should be employable. That encouragement lifts her spirits, and she calls ahead when something comes into view. The brown-haired girl points to their destination in the distance. The silver-haired man looks up, caught by the first sight of the city. From the overlook, the children finally see the vast royal capital spread out before them. As they enter, the city presents itself as crowded, prosperous, and active from end to end. The blue-haired girl is overwhelmed by how alive the capital feels. Their companion explains that the capital thrives on imports, drawing in goods from everywhere. She adds that even remote villages send their specialties here, making the city a hub for trade. The silver-haired man studies the place with growing interest. Seeing many races and customs mingling in one market, he recognizes the capital as a true cultural crossroads. The abundance of foreign goods and the orderly streets reinforce the sense that this city is both wealthy and well managed. By the time they take in the calm, regulated atmosphere, the capital seems stable enough to become the children's new beginning. He reconsiders his situation with a colder, more practical mindset. In the capital, beast folk captives are being humiliated and treated as less than human, reinforcing how ugly this era really is. He accepts that every age carries its own entrenched prejudices and problems. While moving through town with the children, he learns the academy entrance exam is next week. That delay gives them a little breathing room, but the mention of Harnisk Academy makes someone nearby bristle. A noble-looking blonde woman reveals her contempt for beast folk and mixed bloods, exposing the kind of hostility tied to that institution. The group secures lodging in the city and finally has a base to work from. The children immediately throw themselves onto the beds, overwhelmed with relief and excitement at having a proper room. He lets himself acknowledge that they have finally reached a place safe enough to rest. Once the immediate danger has passed, he turns to the real problem of how they will survive here. He checks their remaining money and reminds himself that life in this time runs on coin. Tin explains that the reward for defeating bandits helped, but it will never be enough to support them long term. He adds that the 2 children need stability, and some kind of work if they are going to settle in. His thoughts return to the divine corruptors, but he realizes that without official standing he cannot simply investigate them directly. He weighs his options in silence, searching for a path that fits this world's rules. He considers starting with research into the corruptors instead of chasing them blindly. He remembers that others are already trying to exploit those powers for their own gain, making the threat broader than a few isolated enemies. That thought hardens his resolve. He decides he cannot ignore the corruptors, because leaving them unchecked would only let the danger spread. His determination sharpens into a personal vow. He resolves that he will not allow the same kind of disaster to repeat itself in this age. To gather information, he asks how people in this world study unfamiliar subjects. Tin explains that books are expensive, and back home villagers had to share what little they had. But she also points out that the capital has a library, giving him a possible place to investigate. The idea catches him off guard, because it offers a route he had not considered. He quickly decides the library could be useful both for his research and for learning more about the academy and the world around him. At the library, a clerk politely shuts him down before he can get what he wants. She explains that the books are treated as national treasures and not open to just anyone. Access is restricted to academy students, faculty, staff, and local nobility, so he is formally excluded. Tin notes that she cannot even read the script yet, and he has to admit he is still effectively illiterate too. He reflects that he has only just begun learning the alphabet, so even with access, meaningful research would still take time. Blocked on all sides, he is forced to ask himself what move is left. That answer arrives when two hooded men identify him as the outsider traveling with beast folk children. One of them approaches casually, trying to draw his attention and control the encounter. The pretense drops immediately as the wolf-haired thug swings at him without warning. He catches the blow cleanly, proving he is far more dangerous than they expected. Instead of rattling him, the ambush confirms that the city is already moving against him. The attacker mocks his assumptions about safety and presses the threat openly. He notices a flash of divine power in the strike and reads the situation instantly. He counters at once, driving the attacker back with a forceful blow of his own. The clash erupts with enough power to shock nearby townspeople and expose that something unnatural is in play. The thug recovers and praises his instincts, now treating him as a serious opponent. Watching from nearby, the older child realizes these men are using divine power openly in the middle of the city. He demands to know what they want, forcing them to state their purpose. From the way they targeted him, he concludes this is a paid hit rather than a random street attack. Instead of being troubled, he sees an opportunity in that revelation. The wolf-haired man confirms that someone in the capital finds his presence troublesome enough to have him watched and eliminated. Confident in his backing, the thug lunges again to finish the job. This time he intercepts the attack at the arm, stopping the charge before it can land. The thug's confidence breaks for the first time as he realizes he has badly misjudged his target. A white-haired man abruptly drops into the fight and knocks one of the attackers off balance before he can press the advantage. The beastman thug is left reeling from the sudden counterattack. Another red-haired beastman lashes out in fury, channeling fire through his arms to strike back. The newcomer evades calmly, forcing the flaming attacker to chase him instead of controlling the fight. The fire attack crashes through the street, but it still fails to catch him. Seeing his attack miss, the beastman briefly regains confidence and assumes he still has the upper hand. That confidence vanishes when the white-haired man closes the distance in an instant and reaches for him. He seizes the attacker by the collar before the man can react. Holding him helplessly in the air, the white-haired man dismisses him as too weak to be a real threat. He makes it clear that if the thug wants another chance, he had better come back with the courage to face him properly. The captured beastman realizes in shock that this opponent is nothing like the weak prey he expected. Before the beating can continue, a female knight intervenes and orders everyone to stop moving. Annoyed that her day off has been interrupted, the knight steps in to take control of the disturbance. She declares that both troublemakers are going to jail and signals that no one is to interfere, including the nearby girl and the white-haired man. The white-haired man lets the thug drop, amused that the knight chose to step in only after the fight was already decided. The knight immediately rebukes him for using the same inferior species insult the attackers had used. In front of the gathered crowd, she publicly condemns that prejudice and refuses to let it pass. Her anger settles into a more measured confidence as she reassesses the scene. She notes that the white-haired man has caused trouble almost as soon as arriving in the royal capital, marking him as someone bold and potentially dangerous. At the same time, she makes her own stance clear. To her, wrongdoing stays wrong no matter who commits it. A passing woman then speaks up, explaining that she witnessed the incident and that the people being arrested were actually the ones who attacked first. That testimony forces the knight to reconsider and admit the fight may have been self-defense. As one of the beaten beastmen lies on the ground, the knight studies him and realizes she recognizes him. She identifies the attackers as students from Heart Aina Academy, while the white-haired man turns away, no longer interested in them. Putting the pieces together, she concludes the young witness is not involved in the attack. When the white-haired man questions her mention of a young lady, she brushes it off and orders the captured students taken away. He lightly points out that knights seem to be doing patrol work usually left to the guild. She explains that the capital is too large to leave order to one group alone, though she admits she only happened to pass by while eating. Even while downplaying it, she privately recognizes that the white-haired man is far stronger than he first appeared. She also realizes the academy students he defeated were not weak, which makes his effortless victory even more telling. With a warning not to stir up more trouble in the capital, she prepares to leave. The white-haired man stops her and says there is somewhere he wants her to see. Caught off guard, she turns back to hear him out. He brings her to the Argus estate, shifting the confrontation into a more private negotiation. Once inside, he gets straight to the point and asks for their help. The blonde noble he addresses is stunned, reminded that he once told this man to come if he ever needed assistance. The white-haired man explains that he recently encountered these children after running into the bandits he had been warned about. He reveals that the two blue-haired children had been held captive by those bandits, prompting alarm from the listeners. When asked what happened to the bandits, he answers bluntly that he beat them and left the rest to the guild. The noble absorbs that answer and realizes the man dealt with the entire situation largely by himself. The white-haired man then explains why he brought the children. They have no family and belong to the same oppressed group others call inferior species. Since they have nowhere to go, he wants at least to secure them a place where they can work and live safely. The knight points out that he has no obligation to take responsibility for them, but he treats that as irrelevant. He insists that because he was the one who saved them, he will see their care through to the end rather than abandon them halfway. His resolve leaves the noble thoughtful and the knight exasperated, but neither can dismiss him. The children, sensing hope for the first time, brighten at the possibility of being accepted. The noble finally agrees to let the two of them stay at the estate as live-in servants. But before the matter is settled, he adds that his help comes with a condition. That condition is directed at the white-haired man. In exchange, he must become an instructor. The arrangement quickly transforms the children's future, with the girl and boy now pictured in servant uniforms as they begin a new life. A silver-haired man is immediately judged as not fitting the role expected of him. A maid gratefully addresses Lord Argus, but he brusquely dismisses the thanks. Argus entrusts the education of the children to the silver-haired man and explicitly orders that they not be treated differently for being an inferior species. As the group departs, the children and their attendants show gratitude while the new arrangement is set in motion. The silver-haired man presses Argus on the real reason behind this assignment, sensing a motive beyond simple tutoring. Argus admits he needs someone outside the usual power structure and asks for the man's help with a sensitive matter. He reveals the mission plainly. The man must go undercover at Harnisk Academy. Caught off guard, the silver-haired man demands an explanation. Argus explains that the kingdom is under coordinated attack from several factions working in secret. With the king gravely ill and nearing death, a battle for succession has already begun behind closed doors. Worse, the forces excluded from the throne are conspiring to seize the country. They are exploiting invaders and dragging innocent civilians into the chaos to strengthen their scheme. The silver-haired man realizes the threat extends beyond the obvious political figures already under suspicion. Argus warns that dangerous collaborators are hiding even in the royal capital, and insists their base must be uncovered quickly. He identifies Harnisk Academy as the most likely hiding place for that conspiracy. Without hesitation, Argus announces himself and enters to begin arranging the infiltration. Inside, he explains that someone within the academy will guide the operation from the inside. That contact is introduced as Milia Ultons, a gifted young student of Harnisk Academy. Milia recognizes Argus as her brother, linking the mission to a powerful family connection. She immediately objects to involving someone she considers beneath them and questions why an inferior species is being trusted at all. Argus rebukes her for the insult, but her contempt for inferior species is clearly deep-rooted. The silver-haired man coolly notes that prejudice like hers is widespread across the country, though he refuses to accept being judged by it. Rather than escalate, he diffuses the moment with a mocking apology that exposes Milia's arrogance. A red-haired woman points out that Milia's attitude is exactly the kind of extreme prejudice they are supposed to be confronting. Milia doubles down and demands that her brother understand the seriousness of what she is saying. She clarifies that this mission is not just about sneaking in. The silver-haired man must also serve as an instructor. Still unconvinced, she openly doubts that someone of his race could survive as a teacher, much less command authority. The child traveling with him blurts out that Jean cannot read, undermining him at the worst possible moment. Milia instantly declares the plan impossible on those grounds alone. But the child fiercely insists that Jean possesses qualities none of them can match, even if they are hard to explain. Milia pauses, forced to reconsider after hearing such unwavering faith in him. She grudgingly concedes that he may at least have the strength needed to keep Academy students under control. Even so, she warns that teaching requires more than brute force, setting a higher bar for him. The others absorb that point, and Argus shows a flicker of discomfort at how harshly the exchange has unfolded. The red-haired woman realizes the child's outburst came from genuine loyalty, and softens her view of the interruption. Argus apologizes for the scene, but Jean lets it pass and moves the discussion back to the mission itself. He asks what exactly he is expected to teach if he is to enter the academy as an instructor. Argus answers that Jean appears highly skilled in spirit magic and suggests that should be his subject. Jean asks what part of spirit magic they even want him to cover, implying the field is broader than they assume. The discussion narrows spirit magic to 4 basic forms: ignition, discharge, freezing, and healing, as if that should define the curriculum. Jean is surprised that they think the subject ends there. Argus, now uncertain, asks what Jean means by calling that incomplete. Jean casually asks whether they have forgotten special spirit magic, a rare branch only a few can wield. Argus connects that idea to the unusually capable bandit they encountered before, realizing such power may already exist in this era. That possibility amuses Jean and sharpens his interest in the world he has entered. With quiet confidence, he decides he will overturn this era's common sense himself, beginning by demonstrating a little of his power. 1 week later, the plan advances to Harnisk Academy's entrance exam day. At the academy gates, applicants are being processed and admitted in an orderly flow. Among them, The child companion works diligently through the written exam, showing she has come to compete in her own right. As Jean and his party are escorted through the academy, they are formally welcomed, and he reacts with dry disbelief to how far the operation has already gone. A senior academy official downplays the assignment, explaining that the Holy Knight's 7th unit is unusually occupied and that this instructor duty has simply fallen to them this year. The silver-haired man is caught off guard when he learns the task is now his unit's responsibility. The blonde knight clarifies that the academy rotates a Holy Knight in as a special instructor each year, and this time the burden belongs to the 7th unit. As they continue down the hall, the silver-haired man privately doubts whether someone like him should really be taking such a role. He turns inward, weighing the implications in silence. The older official notices the hesitation and leaves the concern hanging for a moment. Without dwelling on it, he leads them onward to the meeting. He brings them into the office, where the headmaster and another senior figure are already waiting. The headmaster receives them with a measured, appraising calm. The blonde knight formally greets the headmaster, signaling that this is an official audience. The headmaster notes how quickly the young valedictorian has risen into distinction since graduation. The blonde knight answers with dutiful restraint, keeping the exchange respectful and procedural. The headmaster shifts from pleasantries to substance, admitting she has heard many rumors about their current troubles. She shows she is well informed, pointing out that the 7th unit is not only dealing with corruption but is also entangled in internal political conflict. Acknowledging their lack of spare manpower, she frames their situation as understandable but still problematic. She makes clear that their difficulties do not excuse neglecting the academy's needs. The silver-haired man cuts to the real issue, asking whether they truly intend to appoint him as an instructor there. His blunt question forces the room to confront the unspoken prejudice behind the meeting. After a brief pause, he invites them to stop circling the matter and speak plainly. The blonde knight steps in to defend him, asserting that within the 7th unit no one surpasses his capability. He narrows that claim specifically to combat technique, presenting a concrete basis for the appointment. The headmaster accepts the claim provisionally, signaling that she is willing to consider it if it can be substantiated. Before the discussion can settle, the other senior instructor erupts in open opposition and demands the issue be addressed. He denounces the very idea as a violation of academy tradition, insisting that someone of an inferior species must never be allowed to teach there. His protest escalates into outrage, warning that giving such a post to someone like Jean would disgrace the institution. The headmaster lets the objection stand and asks Lord Ludman for his view, testing where the rest of the leadership stands. Ludman sides with the protester, prioritizing the academy's noble-born student body over fairness. He argues that appointing Jean would provoke backlash from both students and faculty, making the decision politically costly. The headmaster admits she feels the same emotional resistance, but leaves room for a more principled judgment. She then turns to Jean himself and invites him to answer for his own fitness. Jean steps forward to meet the challenge directly. He introduces himself formally as Shido Jean of Kodama Village and apologizes for entering the discussion late, choosing composure over defensiveness. The headmaster notes his remarkable self-control despite the insult, and Jean acknowledges that he fully understands their concerns. Rather than plead, he reduces the dispute to a single decisive question. He asks whether they reject him because of his birth or because they truly believe he lacks the ability to teach. By separating prejudice from competence, he forces the headmaster to define the academy's standard. She answers that only ability matters, committing herself to merit over species and principle. Jean immediately asks whether he can prove that ability, pushing her to honor her own standard. The blonde knight seizes the opening and proposes that they settle the matter with a test. The dispute is moved to the academy's spirit magic practice arena, turning argument into trial. There, the protesting instructor explains that because entrance exams are underway, the field is mostly empty and suitable for a private match. He mocks Jean by saying the lack of spectators will spare him public humiliation. Jean answers the taunt with silence, refusing to be baited. The headmaster lays out simple rules. The fight will be conducted using spirit magic alone. She frames the test as the fairest way to judge someone being considered for a spirit magic instructor's post. Even so, word spreads among nearby students, and they gather in confusion after hearing that some kind of mock battle is happening. Among the onlookers, a blonde student realizes this may be her first chance to witness Lord Gita fight. Jean dismisses the whole spectacle as pointless, making clear he sees the prejudice behind it more than the test itself. As the headmaster and the others watch, they prepare to measure how much an allegedly inferior species can really do. The blonde knight quietly recognizes that this will be his first time seeing Jean fight in earnest as well. A Beaskin student dismisses inferior species as physically weak from the outset. He adds that even when such people possess divine power, they can only draw out a trivial amount of it. As a formal test begins in the academy arena, one observer privately hopes that judgment about the challenger has been wrong. The Beaskin examiner decides to stop waiting and moves to prove his superiority immediately. He openly claims the initiative and launches the first attack with a massive fire spell. The silver-haired man evades the blast with ease, leaving the attack to tear through the arena floor instead. Watching students are startled by how quickly the exchange turns serious. Noticing their attention, the examiner grows even more eager to show off. He follows with a barrage of lightning, trying to overwhelm his opponent from every direction. Confident in his advantage, he drives the assault forward without restraint. The silver-haired man slips through the explosions and closes the distance while the examiner is still attacking. The examiner mistakes that movement for desperation and convinces himself his opponent can only run. He boasts that even if he never became a holy knight, graduating top of the academy proves he is far above an inferior species. Certain of victory, he unleashes another heavy strike to finish the match. The silver-haired man finally answers with a calm, almost amused challenge. He intercepts the attack and reveals that this power was never meant to be used against people, though he sees no alternative now. After landing from the clash, he resolves to act despite his reluctance. A strange blue force gathers in his hand, unlike the elemental magic used so far. He declares that he will demonstrate what he can do and condenses the energy into a dark, unstable core. The examiner hesitates as the space above him fractures under the pressure of that unfamiliar power. Before he can react, the force crushes him into the ground as if the arena itself has turned against him. The academy staff watching nearby are stunned by what they have just seen. Even a blonde armored knight is left visibly shaken by the result. A blonde student also realizes this is something far beyond an ordinary duel. Pinned in the shattered floor, the examiner can barely process what just happened. The silver-haired man explains that he merely manipulated the gravity around him slightly, as though this impossible feat were simple. With quiet confidence, he remarks that this academy seems to have much to learn. He makes clear that his lesson is not only for the students but for the faculty as well. From a distance, he leaves the examiner trapped in the crater created by that gravity spell. The examiner stares at him in disbelief, unable to reconcile the result with everything he believed. The silver-haired man casually signals for him to calm down. Shaken and furious, the examiner forces himself back up from the rubble. He demands an explanation, still trying to classify the attack as spirit magic. Unable to accept defeat, he insists the spell must have been some hidden trick because he has never encountered magic like it. His outburst in front of everyone only makes his loss more obvious. The senior observers quietly conclude that the matter is settled and acknowledge the silver-haired man's superiority. Among the students, shock spreads as they struggle to understand what they witnessed. The blonde student recognizes it as a special form of spirit magic, confirming that the feat was real. She is troubled because inferior species are supposed to possess almost no sacred power even after receiving divine blessing. That contradiction leaves her fixated on the silver-haired man's identity. As the examiner grabs at him in panic, she silently wonders who this man really is. A week later, the academy returns to routine, presenting itself as a place that teaches academics but exists above all to forge warriors. At an assembly, the students are reminded that their purpose is to become fighters capable of defeating future invaders. The warning is blunt: anyone who cannot keep up will be expelled without mercy. The head instructor balances that threat with ambition, promising that graduates may truly reach the holy knights if they prove worthy. She emphasizes that everything depends on each student's own ability. From the balcony, students note that this year's class includes many freshmen who look like commoners. The blonde student, still withdrawn and thoughtful, is interrupted by someone calling to her. A red-haired noble named Reyes greets her and remarks that it is unusual for her to show interest in other people. She answers that he is no different, since any noble would want to befriend a promising freshman from another noble house. A red-haired bee-skinned student notices something unusual and turns his attention toward it. He learns that a human is sitting among the instructors because that human is the new lecturer. The idea shocks him, and when pressed for his honest view, he is forced to confront his own prejudice. Caught off guard, he hesitates instead of defending that reaction with confidence. A blonde classmate quietly admits she had also dismissed the human as inferior. From below, the students realize the upper seats are occupied by elite class observers, drawing uneasy attention to the human teacher. The new instructor, Shida-jin, recognizes the academy is vast and that uncovering the hidden problem here will take time. Still, the hostile stares make clear that before he can investigate anything, he must first deal with being branded an inferior species. He decides that standing out too much would be risky, so his first move should be to break their assumptions about him. The scene shifts as the academy day continues. Spirit magic class begins, with Jean now standing at the front as a lecturer. The acting professor warns the students not to underestimate invaders, though he implies the elite class may not need the reminder. His tone turns sly, hinting that he has another point to make. He openly notes the poor attendance and questions whether the students have any motivation at all. The blonde student answers inwardly that they do have a reason for staying. The acting professor reveals the truth with contempt. Many skip class because they refuse to hear an inferior species teach. He admits he spread that information in advance, making the empty seats a deliberate humiliation for Jean. Then, as if nothing is wrong, he invites Jean to introduce himself. Jean calmly acknowledges the rumor and gives his name without showing offense. He explains that he will be teaching spirit magic for a while and expresses willingness to work with the class. The red-haired student immediately challenges whether Jean is capable of the job. Jean leaves that judgment to the students themselves instead of arguing. He adds that anyone who sees no value in his class is free to leave, which only sharpens the challenge in the room. But before anything else, he lays down one rule everyone must obey. He demonstrates spirit magic and orders them never to use that power against other people. Jean explains that spirit magic exists to hinder the invader's extraordinary regeneration. Because human bodies do not trigger that regenerative effect, spirit magic used on people would simply become a weapon that causes injury. That is why, he says, the art was created specifically to fight invaders, not fellow humans. The blonde student takes the warning seriously as Jean asks the class not to misuse the power. A student bursts out laughing, treating the warning as stupidity rather than principle. He mocks Jean for preaching restraint and implies that someone weak would naturally fear spirit magic. Others join in, reducing Jean to a powerless inferior species unworthy of comparison. Laughter spreads through the room, though a few students watched more carefully than the rest. Jean remains expressionless, letting the ridicule run its course. Then he invites them to test their assumption that he has no power. He tells the loudest heckler to use his strongest spirit magic and fire it directly at him. Jean raises the stakes by promising that if the attack can injure him, he will never appear before them again. The challenger accepts with a grin, convinced he has already won. He unleashes a blazing spirit attack and warns Jean not to regret provoking him. The acting professor panics, realizing he may be caught in the blast as Jean stands his ground. The attacker commits fully, hurling the spell with lethal force. The torrent of spirit fire crashes down toward Jean in front of the entire class. The impact explodes violently, filling the room with smoke and debris. Certain he has overwhelmed the human, the attacker smiles in triumph. From within the smoke, a narrow surge of blue power suddenly shoots upward. That counter-strike flashes past the attacker and slams into the wall behind him with precise control. The student recoils in shock as he realizes Jean could have hit him directly. Jean emerges untouched and states that if he had meant to kill, the duel would already be over. He warns the class that judging others by appearance alone can get them killed. Watching this, the red-haired student is left stunned, finally forced to wonder whether Jean truly used spirit magic. A white-haired man turns an insult about being an inferior species on its head, arguing that strength decides status, not birth. He presses the point further and declares that if he is stronger, the proper name for him is not lesser but superior. He gives his own answer with cold confidence. In that case, he stands above them as their teacher. Without backing down, he shifts from provocation to instruction and demands to know whether anyone even understands the real condition for activating spirit magic. He reminds the class that one of them just attacked him with magic and insists on a real explanation instead of excuses. A bestirred student answers with the common belief that spirit magic is simply a matter of visualization. The student lays out the standard method: raise divine power, imagine the desired force, project it into the spirits, and manifest it. The teacher acknowledges that visualization matters, but says the class has mistaken it for the true trigger. He reveals that spirits, or nanomachines, only release power when they receive the correct wavelength. The unfamiliar idea stuns the students, and he begins explaining that spirit magic is built on 8 fundamental wavelengths. He starts with the most familiar example, demonstrating the wavelength of fire. He follows it with lightning, showing that each effect corresponds to a distinct magical frequency. Next comes wind, broadening their understanding beyond the basic attack types. He adds freezing and notes that these 4 are only the level they should already know. As the class listens more seriously, he warns that the system extends beyond those obvious elements. He introduces gravity manipulation as another fundamental branch of spirit magic. Then he shows control over light intensity, proving that magic can alter phenomena beyond raw elemental force. He adds atmospheric pressure manipulation, tying it back to the compressed air attack he used earlier. Finally, he demonstrates space protection, completing the full set and showing a level of mastery far beyond the students' expectations. The older instructor is shaken by the implication that all 8 types can be used through the same underlying principles. The white-haired teacher explains that advanced effects come from applying those basics correctly, just as he turned electrical discharge into a spear and air into a thrown weapon. Once he has their attention, he decides the real lesson can begin. With the class thoroughly subdued, he calmly takes control of the room as its unquestioned authority. Later, he walks through the academy grounds while students move about normally around him. As he surveys the campus, he concludes that the academy is vast and worth investigating, but the teacher he noticed earlier remains his only real lead. Seeing students everywhere and nothing overtly suspicious, he realizes he needs access to somewhere they are not allowed to go. His attention settles on the blonde student from class, and he considers using her to reach restricted areas. He studies her carefully, recognizing that she may know more than she has shown. She notices his scrutiny and meets it without flinching. When she confronts him and demands to know who he really is, he treats the question lightly instead of answering. She presses harder, admitting she can tell he is no ordinary low-born outsider despite his claim. Drawing on what she learned in class, she points out that no inferior species should be able to handle every type of spirit magic. He answers that he already taught the principle. Anyone can use them if they can switch between wavelengths. She rejects that as too simple, arguing that if it were truly that easy, his abilities would not be causing such a stir. Recognizing the attention they are drawing, he suggests they continue the conversation somewhere more private. They leave the open walkway and move into a quieter part of the academy. Once they are alone, she immediately demands honest answers. He responds with an absurdly casual claim that he is just an ancient human from a village she has never heard of, making clear he is still toying with her. Unimpressed, she changes tactics and asks what someone like him was doing a million years ago. This time he answers more directly, saying he lived many lives and once served as an agent. When she questions that, he defines it as someone who worked and fought completely for his country. He recalls battling countless villains, and his tone shifts from teasing to reflective. His memory carries him back to a distant era, where he and his comrades prepared operations together as if that lost world were still close at hand. He remembers strategic briefings in detail, showing how deeply that former life remains etched into him. The recollection sharpens into combat, with him moving through gunfire as a trained operative. He sees himself surviving explosions and fighting through chaos with practiced resolve. Returning to the present, he admits that remembering it all feels painfully nostalgic. The blonde girl cannot understand how someone could sleep for a million years and wake carrying that much history, and he finally reveals the core truth: he failed. He confesses that his downfall came from arrogance, because he believed he could handle everything alone. As the consequence of that failure comes into view, he reveals that he lost everything without being able to save a single thing. The blonde student admits she took the lecturer job hoping that, if things became difficult, the others would help her, though she still cannot tell whether that instinct was right. As they walk, the silver-haired man casually asks where she is leading him, and she insists she is only doing her duty as his guide. Their conversation cuts off when they arrive at a neglected, dust-choked room hidden inside the academy. She reveals that this place stores teaching materials, leaving him to wonder why she brought him somewhere so ordinary. He initially dismisses it as nothing more than a storage room, but a small ornament on the shelf catches his attention. He studies it closely and realizes something about it is out of place. When he asks why they are here, she explains she has been conducting her own investigation. She shows him a floor plan proving there is an unnatural empty space beside the room, large enough to hide another chamber. Accepting her logic, he decides the suspicious gap must conceal something and tests the shelf she suspected. The bookcase slides aside, exposing a hidden stairway behind it. He acknowledges that her deduction was exactly right. She presses him on how he noticed the mechanism so quickly despite the room being buried in dust. He explains that the spot around the owl was unnaturally clean, and that experience told him it was likely the trigger. He moves to investigate the passage alone and tells her to stay behind. She refuses, arguing that if a corruptor is involved then the danger concerns her too, and he has no right to dismiss her. To prove she can keep up, she points to her top grades and insists her abilities are not inferior to her brother's. Amused and persuaded, he agrees to trust her and lets her come. He conjures light in his hand and leads her down the hidden stairs into the darkness. As they descend deeper underground, she notes how useful his light magic is while he observes that the passage extends far below the academy. The eerie tunnel reminds him of a fantasy dungeon, though her confusion shows she does not share the reference. She returns to a more pressing matter and asks about his earlier claim that he had been fighting villains all this time. She pushes further, asking whether he already suspects the specific culprit. After a moment's thought, he admits that he does. He names Professor Rubin as a possible accomplice. When she asks why, he explains that Rubin appears calm while speaking with others. But he says that, when left alone, Rubin's mind seems absent, as if he is not fully himself. He identifies that vacant state as a sign of someone being forced to act against their intended purpose. He adds that Rubin is also unnaturally guarded, though not skilled enough to hide it perfectly. She admits she had suspected Professor Olga instead, but he dismisses that idea. He argues that Olga's emotions are too transparent for deception and judges her unlikely to be hiding malice. With that settled, they continue forward together through the underground passage. The corridor opens into a vast buried space, and they advance cautiously through the haze. She is stunned to discover such an enormous hidden area beneath the academy. Her amazement turns to alarm when he suddenly stops at something ahead. He realizes they have found something he never expected to see in a place like this. Before them stands a massive sealed metal door like the entrance to a high-security research facility. He identifies it as the kind of laboratory entrance once used by Kagura, a relic from a lost age of research. The glowing mechanisms confirm his conclusion that the door is protected by nanomachines. She can barely process that such an enormous advanced structure exists under the academy. She asks whether he can open it, and he explains that it normally requires an access key. When she asks what that means, he clarifies that the key is needed to unlock the door. That explanation triggers a memory and gives him a new lead. He recalls that in Kodama village, Hakama had inherited an access key, which means someone here may have inherited another one as well. Realizing that possibility, he decides to test whether he himself can satisfy the lock. The system recognizes him as Jean and grants access, beginning the unlocking sequence. The huge doors part, revealing the darkness beyond. As the entrance opens, he concludes that whoever is trying to bring chaos to this nation must be the one who possesses the access key. Inside, they come face to face with a gigantic imprisoned creature hidden in the underground facility. The girl recoils in shock, unable to believe something this monstrous has been concealed beneath the academy. As they enter the restricted area, the silver-haired man explains that he could open the door without a key because his status as an ancient human gives him unusual privileges. The blonde student is stunned by the implication that he is not merely old, but a human from 100 million years in the past. While she struggles to process that revelation, he keeps moving through the facility as if this absurd truth changes nothing about their immediate problem. He inspects one of the imprisoned corruptors and notices that the creature is watching him but making no attempt to attack or escape. Seeing rows of caged monsters, he realizes the whole scene is wrong in a way that simple containment cannot explain. He voices the key contradiction. These beings should be resisting, yet they are passively allowing themselves to be held. Even the stronger specimens show no instinct to break free, which convinces him this is not normal captivity. He connects that passivity to the earlier incident, recalling that the corruptors captured by bandits had also been strangely docile. That pattern leads him to a darker conclusion. The real mystery is not how to restrain these creatures, but who subdued them in the first place. He admits his brother's suspicions were justified and concludes that the academy itself has become deeply suspect. The girl wants to stay hidden and wait for whoever is behind this to reveal themselves, hoping to catch the mastermind directly. He rejects that plan and insists their first duty is to seal the academy and eliminate the corruptors before anything else goes wrong. When she protests that letting the mastermind escape would waste their chance, he forces her to consider the cost of delay. He reminds her that if the creatures break loose, the students above them will be the ones slaughtered. By invoking her brother's values, he makes clear that protecting lives must come before revenge or answers. She reluctantly accepts his reasoning, while he remains uneasy and admits that his instincts tell him there is still more to uncover. Trusting that intuition, he decides to keep investigating the laboratory himself a little longer. He orders her to find Argus and have the academy sealed off at once. With that decision made, they split up so each can act on a different part of the crisis. Left alone, he notices a strange astronomical clock mounted near a concealed entrance, and pauses on it as a possible clue. He heads through the hidden passage, hoping it will explain what is really happening inside the academy. The clock's unusual design reinforces that this secret route was built for something deliberate and important. Elsewhere in the academy, students gather casually in the corridor, unaware of the danger building around them. A bitter-beasted lecturer becomes the target of student gossip about having been humiliated by the new instructor. Humiliated and furious, he blames his disgrace on being looked down on as an inferior species. He convinces himself the new lecturer must be cheating because no one should be able to wield 8 kinds of spirit magic fairly. His resentment escalates into a vow to expose the man no matter what. The headmaster interrupts, dryly asking him to stop his bizarre public outbursts before he unsettles the students. When the lecturer fumes at being mocked, the headmaster brushes it aside and shifts to a more serious matter. He asks whether anyone has seen Lord Rudman, introducing a concern that immediately changes the tone. The lecturer realizes Rudman has been missing since the entrance ceremony, making the situation genuinely troubling. The headmaster had wanted to discuss the freshman curriculum with Rudman, but that routine business is abruptly overshadowed. He senses something abnormal before anyone else can explain it. Looking outside, he sees a mass of dark purple energy forming over the academy and understands that a new threat has appeared. At the same time, the blonde girl races through the hidden passages, intent on reporting everything to her brother as fast as possible. She emerges from a concealed doorway behind a bookshelf, carrying the secret of the underground lab back into the open. Breathless and shaken, she tries to steady herself long enough to decide her next move. She resolves to report the discovery immediately, but before she can leave, an unseen voice challenges her. The sudden interruption freezes her in place and makes her realize she is no longer alone. She turns to find Lord Rudman standing in the room, as if he has been waiting for her. His presence shocks her because the missing noble has appeared exactly where he should not be. Deeper below, a sealed chamber opens to reveal a blinding red glow and machinery hidden behind the academy's walls. The silver-haired man steps into the chamber and realizes he has found something far beyond a simple holding facility. At the center of the room, he discovers a massive red organic core fused into a machine and surrounded by active magical interfaces. Watching it pulse like a living organ, he understands that this device is not inert equipment, but something disturbingly alive. He suspects Kagura created the apparatus and begins searching its controls for an explanation. His search leads him to a secured case hidden within the console. Inside, he finds 2 things deliberately left behind for him: a message cube and a nanomachine injector. Recognizing that Kagura expected someone to reach this point, he decides the cube may finally explain the Academy's crisis. When he activates it, a recorded image of Kagura appears, greeting Jean and confirming that he has reached the truths she prepared for him. A scientist contacts the silver-haired man and confirms he has reached the nearest lab connected to the place he had been seeking. He explains that this laboratory had been developing an extraordinary device. Part of that device's function, he says, was sealed into nanomachines. Pleased with himself, the scientist challenges him to identify what the invention actually is. The silver-haired man immediately realizes it is a teleportation device. Even he is unsettled by the implication and repeats the conclusion to make sure he understood it correctly. That answer makes him connect the lab to the enormous imprisoned creature before him. He also notices a massive red machine in the chamber and begins to grasp the scale of the experiment. The caged monster confirms that this facility was built around something far beyond ordinary science. A nearby astronomical clock starts moving, signaling that some linked mechanism has been activated. As the clock turns, it suggests the lab's systems are synchronized with a larger timed event. The red core hums to life while the silver-haired man studies it from a control console below. He steadies himself and reaffirms that the machine's purpose is teleportation. He reasons that such technology links one space to another and should have been impossible for this era to create. Testing the idea in his mind, he imagines matter being transferred from one location to another. That thought leads him to Argus's earlier claim about invaders suddenly appearing inside the royal capital. He concludes those attackers may have been sent there through this very kind of device. Remembering that even the invaders in the hall appeared unnaturally, he starts fitting the pieces together. But when he compares the machine in front of him to the teleportation device he sees a crucial difference. That discrepancy alarms him, because this machine is not the same as the one he expected. Facing the pulsing red core, he realizes he may be looking at something even more dangerous. The clock suddenly reacts more violently, as if the final trigger has been reached. The red machine erupts in blinding light and begins discharging overwhelming energy. The silver-haired man shields himself, caught off guard by the sudden activation. Across the chamber, the caged creature is bathed in that crimson surge. The energy floods over the monster, suggesting the machine is acting directly on it rather than merely transporting it. A pillar of light engulfs the cage, completing the activation sequence. Elsewhere, an urgent report reaches Lord Argus that the city has entered an emergency. Argus instantly understands what this means. As a crimson beam tears into the sky and debris rises around it, he recognizes the event as the worst possible outcome. At the same time, a blonde noblewoman confronts an older beastman official and demands to know what he is hiding. The official greets Lady Ultons with smug calm, showing he had expected this confrontation. She accuses him of being involved and prepares to force the truth out of him. He admits she has figured it out, but tells her she is already too late to stop anything. Refusing to back down, she demands to know what he means. He reveals that today was the day his faction put its plan into motion. He adds that the operation had originally been scheduled for later, but her interference made him move it up. His narrowed gaze shows he has already accounted for the people trying to oppose him. Meanwhile, the silver-haired man races through the passage, and the official identifies him as a future threat. He claims he sensed by instinct that this man would become as troublesome as the woman's older brother. He further reveals that the silver-haired man has already discovered the hidden passage below. Pointing downward, he says he would rather crush that budding danger immediately. Lady Ultons challenges him to try, confident she can stop him. The official answers with absolute confidence, claiming he now possesses unbeatable power. As purple energy swirls around him, he boasts that he has obtained invincible strength, while two girls behind him are caught in the scene. Lady Ultons is shaken for a moment, but he promises to demonstrate that new power on her as well. He grandly declares this transformed strength to be his new power and prepares to use it. Instead of panicking, Lady Ultons suddenly smiles as if she has already seen through him. One of the girls exhales in relief, signaling that the threat has just been neutralized. The Beastman official lies defeated on the floor, and the brown-haired girl proudly announces that she has won. A blonde student confronts the intruder in the room and demands to know why she is there. The answer is urgent: chaos has erupted outside, and they need Jean immediately. Another girl explains that Kudo insisted Jean should be told at once. Put on the spot, Kudo nervously introduces herself as a freshman while trying to justify barging in. As they move past the fallen teacher, the girls worry about whether attacking him will cause trouble, but decide it can be covered up. They reassure themselves that no one saw their faces and joke about pinning everything on the blonde girl, who sharply rejects being treated like an older woman. Before the bickering can continue, Jean moves out at once. The dark-haired girl realizes from his sudden urgency that the situation is worse than they thought. Jean appears in the doorway, and the others immediately press him for answers. When told the city is spiraling out of control, Jean reveals he already knows. He explains that the invaders who entered the research facility have all vanished, implying something far more dangerous is underway. The blonde girl starts to grasp the implication and turns uneasy. Jean leads the three girls outside at a run to confirm what has happened. From the outer wall, they see the capital engulfed in fire, with destruction spreading across the city. Below them, civilians flee in terror as monstrous beasts hunt them through the streets. Flying creatures join the assault, proving the attack is widespread and coordinated. The monsters smash through the city unchecked, tearing apart buildings as they advance. Far off, a gigantic corruptor rises over the capital like the true source of the disaster. Its grotesque form becomes clear as it fully emerges, towering above everything around it. The giant creature roars and releases overwhelming power, announcing itself as a city-ending threat. The blonde girl realizes in horror that the royal capital itself is under direct attack. Jean blames himself for misjudging the danger and regrets not destroying the device responsible the moment he found it. The dark-haired girl suddenly spots the giant's next move and urgently points it out. A massive ring of energy gathers behind the corruptor as it prepares a long-range strike. The creature condenses that power into its mouth, aiming a devastating blast. Its target becomes obvious: the royal castle at the heart of the capital. The girls realize that if the attack lands, the royal family may be wiped out. Accepting responsibility, Jean decides he will stop it himself. He activates a powered-up teleportation function drawn from the Nanamakine's stored energy. He recalls that the researcher who made it warned that this simplified teleport can only be used once a day. Even with its limits to short-range jumps within sight, Jean understands it is enough for what he needs. As the beam fires toward the castle, there is no time left for hesitation. A teleport point opens in front of the stunned girls, showing Jin's plan in action. He leaps through space and appears directly in the beam's path beside the castle. Jean intercepts the attack with a barrier, proving the device lets him jump wherever he can see. Elsewhere in the city, smaller monsters continue slaughtering civilians while panic spreads. Inside the castle, a messenger races through the halls with news from the battlefield. She reports to the guild master that a giant corruptor has appeared at the outer wall. The guild master reveals he already knows and has been watching the disaster unfold. Hardin Gunslot, the royal capital's guild master, grimly says there is little more they can do. He explains that everyone still capable of fighting is already outside trying to hold the city together. Even the Holy Knights are fully engaged, with no reserve force left to deploy. When pressed for the real reason, Hardin reveals a deeper problem behind their weakness. Half of the Holy Knights are away from the capital on a mission, leaving the city exposed. Outside, the giant corruptor continues its assault, confirming the capital was struck at its most vulnerable moment. Hardin concludes the enemy deliberately attacked while the Holy Knights were absent, making this a planned operation rather than a random outbreak. He admits that if the Grand Commander had been present, they might have had a chance to stop it. At that same moment, the giant beam tears across the city toward the castle with catastrophic force. Believing the end has come, Hardin starts to resign himself before the messenger interrupts and tells him to look. His eyes widen as he realizes something impossible has happened outside. The silver-haired fighter intercepts a devastating blast with a hexagonal barrier, forcing the attack away before it can tear through the city. Watching from inside, an older beastman and a young officer realize the man outside is someone they recognize. The girl excitedly identifies him as the person from Kodama village, confirming unexpected reinforcements have arrived. Outside, the wounded monster steadies itself over the capital as smoke rises around it. The newcomer launches himself back into the fight without hesitation. As he lands, he gathers blue energy into his hand and prepares a direct counterattack. He releases that power in a concentrated surge aimed straight at the creature. The blast slams forward with enough force to shake the battlefield. He stays calm and analytical even while attacking, measuring the enemy rather than overcommitting. The strike tears into the monster's damaged side, but the creature remains standing. He concludes the monster is too massive to bring down with brute force alone, especially in his current state. He admits teleporting here drained him more than expected, and the situation is already going off script. Instead of retreating, he decides to treat the battle as practical training. He forms an energy blade around his arm, choosing close combat over another ranged exchange. With that improvised weapon, he cuts forward in a sweeping charge. The slash crashes into the monster, and buys him a brief opening. He immediately accelerates again, refusing to let the enemy recover. While moving through the city walls and rooftops, he reasons that repeated attacks like that should force the monster to regenerate, and create time for everyone else. He sharpens his concentration and commits fully to the plan. Closing in on the monster again, he decides to apply nanomachine techniques rather than rely on raw power. He first lightens his own body through gravity manipulation so he can move with far greater speed and freedom. He touches down lightly, showing the technique is working. Then he adds atmospheric pressure control to generate wind and further boost his mobility. At street level, civilians are still moments from being killed by another beast lunging down at them. A fireball suddenly streaks in from the side. The blast knocks the beast away and saves the trapped civilians at the last instant. Two Beastman students from Harnisk Academy reveal themselves as the ones who intervened. A spear-wielding ally joins them, thanking the students for stepping in and accepting their help. The students insist protecting the royal capital is reason enough to fight. Even surrounded by monsters, the small group steels itself and chooses to hold the line. At that moment, the silver-haired fighter drops back into their area at high speed. He sweeps past them in a blur, cutting through the nearby monsters before they can close in. The sudden rescue catches the defenders off guard, and one of them calls out to understand what just happened. The students quickly realize the man who just saved them is human, and that fact unsettles them even as they acknowledge it. Meanwhile, he notes the main monster still needs time to regenerate its earlier wound, so he decides to press in before it recovers. The creature answers by unleashing another roar and gathering fresh power in its damaged side. It fires twin golden attacks down the street, trying to stop his advance. He slips between the blasts and avoids the bombardment with room to spare. Seeing that the new attacks are less dangerous than the first one, he judges the monster vulnerable and decides to end the fight now. He cuts down another monster in passing, clearing the path and protecting nearby civilians at the same time. He declares that before the main creature can strike again, he will finish it. Pushing his movement technique harder, he drives himself to even greater speed. With a fierce grin, he embraces the acceleration and turns the battle into a one-sided chase. He rushes straight under the towering monster's guard before it can track him. A powerful slash tears up the ground as he attacks from below and forces the creature off balance. He follows with another rising cut, chaining his strikes too quickly for the monster to answer. For the first time, the creature visibly falters, shocked that it is being overwhelmed. Watching from a distance, armored defenders can only stare as the tide of battle suddenly shifts. Students observing from above are equally stunned by the speed and dominance of his assault. Still in motion, he continues his relentless advance, poised to deliver the next decisive blow. A blinding storm of blue energy lashes into a giant corrupted creature at point-blank range. The attack keeps drilling through its body, overwhelming its defenses before it can recover. The silver-haired fighter commits fully to the strike, forcing the monster back under relentless pressure. Cracks and glowing wounds spread across the giant as the assault tears through it. Even towering over the battlefield, the creature is now clearly at the mercy of the lone man above it. The giant lunges anyway, trying to crush him before the attack finishes it. He answers with a decisive finishing move, recognizing this as the moment to end the fight. His blow detonates through the monster, and he declares the battle over. The giant staggers under repeated impacts as the final strike drives it down through the city. A massive blue explosion erupts from the academy grounds, shaking the entire area. The blast surges outward like a pillar, making the scale of the destruction impossible to ignore. At the royal capital, onlookers stare up in alarm as they realize something catastrophic has happened. They can only watch in confusion, unable to understand what is unfolding. When the smoke clears, the silver-haired man lands while the giant collapses behind him, its corruption burning away. Witnesses are left stunned, trying to grasp who this man could possibly be. 3 days later, the city is already recovering, with damage visible but life continuing. From his room, the man looks out over the rebuilding town as people below return to normal. He reflects that despite the upheaval, the overall damage was limited. He credits the Holy Knights for containing the crisis as well as they did. Many knights had been tied down elsewhere, already mobilized against giant corruptors, which explains why so few could respond immediately. Even so, the aftermath was handled quickly and order was restored. The academy itself was sealed off while authorities began a formal investigation. The lecturer who orchestrated the giant and Lord Rudman were both arrested. Other faculty suspected of involvement were also detained and taken to the royal capital for questioning. With the academy effectively shut down for a while, he notes that their trip there ended after only a single day. But the incident leaves him with a new problem to solve. He realizes that when enemies gather together he can handle them, but scattered threats are far harder to eliminate at once. To truly protect everyone from corruptors, he concludes that he must become even stronger. Holding a glowing cube-like artifact, he turns his thoughts toward how to achieve that. Before he can continue, someone arrives at his door. He opens it cautiously, expecting an interruption rather than a threat. Instead, a blonde young woman appears in an extravagant dress and announces that she has come to escort him. With playful confidence, she addresses him as her master. He jokes about the academy being on break, and she explains that his elder brother has summoned him. She adds that his brother wants his help with the recent incident, and has another matter to discuss as well. Surprised she came personally, he points out that she could have sent a servant instead. He teases that someone of his status hardly needed such special treatment. She smoothly replies that she came in person as the family representative, trying to present herself with dignity. He immediately needles her about whether she is still looking down on him, and she insists she has reflected on her behavior. She grandly declares that people should not be judged by appearances and that everyone deserves respect. Pushing the act further, she says she hopes to receive his guidance from now on, only to be interrupted by another arrival. Hakama appears, casually admitting she came by simply because she was bored. The blonde woman is instantly irritated by the country girl's carefree intrusion. Her annoyance exposes how little her supposed self-reflection has actually changed her. The group then heads to the Argus mansion. Inside, the household staff formally welcome the lady back as she leads the others in. A butler asks 2 young servants to guide the guests, and they eagerly accept. As the children lead the way, the silver-haired man remarks that they seem comfortable working there now, and they credit him for it. He asks whether they were hurt during the recent chaos. They proudly explain that the people at the mansion protected them, reinforcing that everyone there proved unexpectedly strong. Jean hears that the children under Milia and Argus are being treated well, and that Milia has been especially active lately. When he asks where that impression came from, the answer is that Milia and Argus themselves have been spreading word of his reputation. Milia proudly frames that praise as the natural duty of a disciple devoted to her master. She even tells the children that if they share the same race as Jean, they should follow his example, and they eagerly accept that idea. One of the boys admits Milia used to be strict with them until recently. Jean notes the sudden kindness with uneasy amusement, comparing it to an unexpected change in someone he knows. With the children and attendants gathered around him, Jean is led deeper into the estate for a formal meeting. The maid announces Jin's arrival, and the people inside permit him to enter. Inside, Jean finds 2 important figures waiting for him, a royal knight and a stern beastman official. The beastman studies Jean in silence, clearly judging him before speaking. Jean is welcomed in and invited to sit, while the children remain respectfully behind him. The meeting begins politely, with apologies for the sudden summons and Jean accepting them without complaint. The knight takes charge of the introduction and presents the beastman as the guild master stationed in the royal capital. The official is identified as Lord Hardin Gunslot. Hardin formally introduces himself and shakes Jin's hand, establishing the encounter as official rather than hostile. Hardin reveals that he witnessed Jin's role in the recent incident and wants to speak frankly about it. He makes clear that without Jin stopping the monster, the country would have fallen into a serious crisis. Hardin bows his head and offers sincere thanks for saving the nation. Jin immediately downplays the praise, insisting he only defeated the main threat. He redirects the credit to the Holy Knights, saying they were the ones who contained the aftermath. That humility makes Hardin wonder whether Jin is truly selfless or simply hiding his ambition. Jin asks if gratitude was the only reason for calling him here, and the answer is no. Hardin explains that the royal family now wishes to meet Jin because of what he has done. Before allowing that audience, however, Hardin insists there is something fundamental about Jin that must be clarified. He bluntly demands to know who Jin really is. Hardin explains that his information network reaches every town in the country, yet it has uncovered nothing at all about Jin. He apologizes for investigating him, but stresses that the complete absence of records is exactly why this cannot be ignored. The knight reinforces the pressure by warning that this time Jin will not be allowed to dodge the question. Even Milia and the others are drawn into the tension as Hardin presses for Jin's origin. The interrogation sharpens further when Hardin asks what purpose brought Jin to this country in the first place. Jin realizes he is being forced to answer seriously. Hardin repeats the demand from across the table, making it clear that silence is no longer acceptable. The knight watches him closely, ready to judge whatever comes next. Jin admits he never truly tried to conceal the truth. He simply expected no one would believe it. He says that assumption is why he kept quiet until now. The knight answers that if the explanation comes directly from Jin, he is willing to hear it out. Taking that as enough assurance, Jin decides to speak plainly. He begins with a statement so strange it changes the mood of the room at once. Jin reveals that he is a human from 100 million years in the past. The knight immediately connects that claim to the taboo surrounding Kodama village. He realizes Jin must be the man who had been sleeping behind the sealed doors there. Hardin admits the story is difficult to accept, but after considering everything, he chooses to believe Jin. Milia eagerly jumps in to support him, reminding everyone that Jin opened the ancient doors. She points to the forbidden doors beneath the academy as proof that Jin is tied to a past no one else could access. Setting that aside, she argues that everyone present has already seen enough of Jin's power to know he is no ordinary man. The knight is startled by how strongly Milia is now advocating for Jin. Her sudden devotion leaves him baffled, as if she has completely changed sides. Jin resumes the explanation by stating that he had been asleep beneath this country the entire time. He adds that he came to the royal capital because he wanted to gather information after waking up. When Hardin asks what information he was searching for, Jin answers that there are two things. The silver-haired man begins by explaining that the corruptors are the first key issue. He reveals that these creatures already existed 100 million years ago, shocking the others. He adds that, by all logic, they should have survived into the present. When asked why, he traces it back to the spirits. 100 million years earlier, spirits had been scattered across the world. Ancient facilities appear to have activated some vast spiritual mechanism. That power was unleashed upward on a massive scale. It then spread across the planet, suggesting a world-changing purification event. He explains that corruptors can only live in polluted environments. Since spirits can cleanse those environments, they naturally became the corruptor's enemy. Asked why corruptors still exist now, he admits he does not know the full details, but he has a lead. Drawing on information from a friend, he presents evidence that the corruptors may now be evolving. That possibility makes the wolf-haired man wonder if this knowledge comes from an ancient civilization. But even if it does, no one understands how that old technology actually worked. The silver-haired man says that uncertainty is exactly why he came to the royal capital. He expects the capital to preserve records from that era, including how people in the present have been dealing with corruptors. When asked about his second objective, he turns to the matter of the research facilities. One such facility lies beneath the capital, and it was built by his friend. He is searching for similar facilities around the world, though he keeps the secret of how they are powered to himself. Setting that aside, he states that everything he is doing serves a single purpose. His goal is to erase the corruptors from the face of the world, which is why he came here. The room falls into a brief silence as everyone absorbs the scale of his story and ambition. The blonde knight admits the tale is hard to believe, and the wolf-haired man agrees. Still, the knight chooses to trust him because they share the same desire to solve the corruptor threat. Even so, he warns that telling this story to others would only isolate him. The silver-haired man already understands that. When the knight asks the wolf-haired man for his view, he says he will also believe him. His reasoning is practical. Someone intending harm would not have risked themselves to protect the castle. Their discussion is interrupted by someone arriving. A maid enters with a young attendant and informs Lord Argus that his scheduled audience is about to begin. The timing catches them off guard, but the appointment cannot be delayed. The knight immediately turns to the others and tells them to get ready. The silver-haired man is puzzled, but the attendants answer for him with military obedience. Soon after, a carriage is set in motion. They are taken toward the royal castle for the formal meeting. On the way, the silver-haired man realizes he is being prepared for a proper royal audience. Now dressed in formal clothes, he questions whether the change was really necessary. The knight reassures him that the outfit suits him perfectly. The women who help dress him are delighted, even if he complains that the clothes are hard to move in. Argus explains that the person they are meeting is the first prince, currently acting in the king's place. He insists that appearance matters in front of royalty, and the silver-haired man reluctantly accepts the inconvenience. As they approach the castle, he can only hope this audience does not drag him into yet another complication. Inside, rows of elite guards line the grand hall, underscoring the weight of the occasion. More armed retainers stand watch, making the audience feel as much like a test as an honor. Before the throne, the knight and Argus kneel and formally present the silver-haired man as the one who saved the nation during its recent crisis. A calm voice from above orders him to raise his head. He complies, still kneeling, while the others remain respectfully lowered behind him. As he looks up, he realizes exactly who stands before him. The ruler before him is the first prince, Tails Kuromiya. The silver-haired man introduces himself as Jin Shido, and the prince receives him with measured courtesy. A blonde noble receives the visitor in place of his better-than father, praises his accomplishments, and establishes himself as the one in control. He identifies the kneeling man as someone from Kodama village, making clear he already knows his background. He immediately belittles that village and frames the visitor's talent as an unlikely exception, testing how much disrespect he will endure. Dropping the pretense of courtesy, the prince makes it clear he intends to speak plainly. His true demand emerges. The visitor is to enter his service. More specifically, he is to become a holy knight of the nation and devote himself entirely to that role. From the top of the hall, the prince repeats the order as a command rather than an offer. He spells out the terms with open menace, expecting obedience and hard service. The silver-haired man remains silent, weighing the demand instead of yielding to it. Sensing resistance, the prince presses for an immediate answer. An older wolf-haired ally objects that forcing the man is wrong, reminding the prince that they were the ones who summoned him. He openly challenges the coercion, arguing that this treatment violates the purpose for which the visitor was brought here. The silver-haired man finally answers for himself, stating he never intended to stay in this country for long. The prince tries to undermine that refusal by pointing to his current work at the academy and dismissing it as temporary. When asked directly whether he is refusing, the man calmly confirms that he is. The prince instantly abandons negotiation and decides to use force. Weapons move at once, showing the order was prepared in advance. A ring of armed knights closes in around the kneeling group as the prince commands them to seize him. The wolf-haired man lunges to protect the prince's target, outraged by the betrayal. The prince justifies the arrest by accusing the silver-haired man of treason. He ties that accusation to the sealed ancient door beneath the academy, where the corruptors had been hidden. Claiming rumors say the visitor opened that door, the prince presents suspicion alone as sufficient grounds for arrest. He pushes the accusation further, suggesting the man's earlier heroics may have been staged to win trust. The wolf-haired ally rejects the claim as absurd and condemns it as a baseless leap. Surrounded by spearpoints, the accused man stays composed and continues to study the prince rather than panic. The prince admits he would have overlooked everything if the man had simply sworn loyalty to him. By saying refusal leaves him no choice, he reveals the charge is merely a tool to punish disobedience. A blonde knight realizes the accusation makes no sense because the man only arrived in the city recently. He remembers that the prince himself had assigned the man to investigate the academy, exposing the contradiction in the setup. Another commander understands they have been manipulated and regrets not recognizing the prince's schemes sooner. He identifies the forces carrying out the arrest as commanders personally loyal to the first prince rather than to justice. The involvement of multiple squads confirms this was organized beforehand. The blonde knight concludes that if the man refused, they intended from the start to eliminate him under a convenient pretext. The implication becomes clear. This summons was never a fair audience but a trap with only one acceptable outcome. The prince reframes the target as too dangerous to leave free, invoking the giant corruptor he defeated as proof. Even so, he pretends to be merciful and offers one final chance to submit. That final chance is simple surrender, swear loyalty to him. The hall settles into a tense standoff, with the man encircled and every weapon waiting on his answer. Instead of accepting the premise, the silver-haired man challenges the logic of the prince's demand. The prince bristles when asked what value a spoken oath has under open coercion. Even the knights around them recognize the point. A forced promise would mean nothing if he could later flee. The accused man states plainly that the prince seems less interested in loyalty than in forcing a public submission. He pushes further, wondering whether this is merely a hunger for control or something more hidden. That suggestion strikes a nerve, and the prince's expression hardens as if the question has come too close to the truth. Before the prince can answer, the silver-haired man cuts off the outburst around him and takes command of the moment himself. One of the prince's loyal commanders explodes in anger at his insolence, trying to reassert the prince's authority. Unmoved, the silver-haired man dismisses the noise and tells them to pay attention. A sudden shift runs through the weapons surrounding him, as if his focus alone has altered the situation. The furious commander notices something is wrong with the spears and falters in confusion. In the next instant, the balance of the confrontation breaks as movement erupts from the center of the trap. In the middle of the palace confrontation, a horned noble is violently knocked aside as the clash spills out of control. The impact sends him tumbling, showing that the side trying to dominate the room has already lost its footing. A silver-haired man keeps his composure and pointedly notes that someone is no longer in any position to keep talking. The blonde vampire noble realizes the situation is turning against him and watches sharply for what comes next. One of the royal guards, Argus, looks rattled and disoriented, as if something crucial has gone wrong. A dark-skinned knight reaches for spirit magic to stop the intruder, only to lash out in frustration when it fails. Her shock deepens as she confirms her spirit magic is not responding at all. Unable to rely on magic, she immediately switches to force and orders the guards to seize the target. The guards rush the silver-haired man together, trying to overwhelm him with numbers. He breaks their momentum effortlessly, striking one attacker down with a clean counter. Without losing control, he turns the captured weapon in his hands and prepares to deal with the rest. A sweeping attack sends multiple guards flying, making it clear that ordinary soldiers cannot contain him. The vampire noble demands to know what Argus is doing and orders the guards to support him properly. Argus hardens himself under that pressure and is told to punish the insult done to the royal family. He steps forward with his sword drawn, placing himself between the intruder and the nobles behind him. Even as he commits to the fight, Argus admits there is no personal grudge in it. The vampire noble delights in the escalation and openly orders that the silver-haired man be taken by any means. The hall erupts again as the guards charge under that command. This time the silver-haired man releases blue magical power, revealing he has held back until now. His magic crashes into the charging formation and stops the assault cold. The vampire noble concedes that letting him roam free is indeed dangerous. He boasts that if he truly wished, destroying the entire city would be easy for him. But he explains that he has no intention of doing that, because he wants to stand with ordinary people rather than prey on them. He declares that his purpose is to protect those living in the present. Then he appears directly behind the blonde vampire, and adds that there are exceptions to his restraint. He makes his standard plain: anyone who casts a shadow over other people's lives will receive no mercy from him. At close range he forces the vampire to face the question of what kind of villain he really is, naming him as Tails Kermosia. In the center of the hall, surrounded by armed guards, he repeats that judgment without wavering. For the first time, Tails is visibly shaken by someone treating him as prey instead of untouchable royalty. Argus recovers enough to denounce the intruder, accusing him of recklessly making an enemy of the nation. He insists he is only resisting people who are trying to force unreasonable demands on him. The Horn Noble protests that this defiance itself is what will turn the country against him. The silver-haired man rejects that excuse and places the blame squarely on them instead. An older wolf-haired man backs him up, saying respect would be possible if the royals behaved like true royalty. The blonde knight adds that he would even obey lawful requests, if those requests were not absurd. The dark-skinned knight makes her own stance clear: she will not submit quietly to unreasonable authority. The Horn Noble snaps back that if they choose force, they have no right to complain when others resist with force as well. Before pressing further, the silver-haired man asks Tails a final question. He asks whether Tails is merely a fool who assumes everything should go his way, or something worse. Tails, sweating now, braces himself to hear the answer. The silver-haired man fixes him with a cold, luminous stare, ready to pass judgment. Before he can finish, a new presence interrupts from the entrance, asking to join the discussion. A woman in an elegant blue dress steps into the hall, redirecting everyone's attention. She politely requests permission to take part in the conversation, despite the armed standoff around her. Her arrival instantly changes the atmosphere, and even the combatants hesitate before her. The Horn Noble recognizes her in alarm as Lady Charlotte. The blonde knight exhales in relief, realizing she arrived before the situation became even worse. He yields the matter to her, addressing her formally as the second princess. Charlotte Kermosia greets her brother lightly, noting that he seems to have been enjoying himself amid the chaos. Tails can only stare back tensely and utter her name, knowing the balance of power has just shifted again. A sharp gaze signals that someone is already assessing the situation with suspicion. In the royal hall, the blonde prince realizes the discussion has taken an unwelcome turn. The second princess calmly argues that if her brother intends to honor the man who saved their nation, she should be included as well. She undercuts the prince's authority by pointing out that he is not even acting as their father's official representative. That jab visibly rattles the prince. He tries to recover by declaring that the man before them is no hero at all. His silver-haired ally reinforces the accusation, branding the supposed savior a criminal who threatens the royal family. The princess answers with feigned innocence and invites the court to examine what actually happened. She reframes the incident as nothing more than a guard overreacting with open disrespect toward her guest. The prince's side points dramatically toward the silver-haired man and insists he was about to harm the first prince. The accused immediately exposes the claim as absurd, noting that he had merely been standing behind the prince. With a smile, the princess presses the witness to confirm that simple fact. He does, explaining that all he did was stand there and ask a question. The blonde prince realizes his attempt to criminalize the man is collapsing. The princess mocks the idea that the nation's hero could be condemned for something so petty. Humiliated, the prince seethes but cannot answer her logic. She turns back to Sir Jean and formally addresses him instead of her brother. Rather than asking him to serve the country, she asks whether he would at least lend his strength as a friend if the nation ever faced trouble. Jean accepts that limited request without hesitation. Satisfied, the princess thanks him and decides the confrontation has gone on long enough. She orders everyone to move elsewhere, ending the public dispute on her terms. Then she openly claims Jean as her guest and commands the guards to clear the way and show proper respect. The guards obey at once, forced to stand down. The prince can only watch in fury as control slips from his hands. Once they leave by carriage, Jean admits the scene made him break into a cold sweat. Asked why he provoked things so boldly, he says it was mostly instinct. He explains that he sensed something ominous from the prince and acted on that unease. Even so, he remains unconvinced that the danger was imaginary. Inside, Jean thanks the princess for intervening, but she dismisses the need for gratitude. She insists that the royal side should be apologizing for how disgracefully the nation's hero was treated. She then properly introduces herself as Charlotte, the second princess. Charlotte says she hopes they can remain good friends from now on, and Jean agrees. The younger knight wonders why the first prince would act so recklessly, unable to read his true aim. Charlotte answers that her brother is deeply ambitious. She believes that once he takes the throne, he intends to wage war on neighboring nations and expand their territory. In that future, she warns, Jin's existence would likely become an obstacle to him. To ease his immediate concern, she promises that her brother will not be able to touch him for now. She explains that the incident should already be reaching their father, whose restrictions will keep the prince in check for the time being. Jean reveals that his real concern is not personal safety but that he has no intention of letting the throne fall to such a man. Charlotte asks directly whether he truly means that. He confirms it, and she accepts his answer with quiet satisfaction. As they arrive at his current residence, she asks where exactly he has been staying since he saved the country. She remarks that summoning someone of his stature without offering any reward would be terribly rude. Hearing that he has been living in an inn, she treats it as unacceptable. That is why she says she has already made arrangements for him. With cheerful confidence, Charlotte reveals that she has prepared something on his behalf. Jean is caught off guard as he begins to understand what she means. She presents him with a grand villa. Charlotte explains that it is an old royal capital residence, and invites him to use it however he likes. Jean steps inside in stunned silence while Charlotte watches, pleased with the impression she has made. They arrive at an opulent mansion, and the sheer extravagance makes it clear Charlotte is being given far more than a simple place to stay. Charlotte hesitates over accepting something so grand, but the silver-haired man assures her she has every right to it. She explains the estate once belonged to a count, though that title is no longer held, which only deepens his uncertainty. When he worries about the former owners returning, she brushes the concern aside before fully answering, signaling there is more behind the matter. Even so, he remains uneasy about one person receiving an entire house, while the blonde commander frames it as proof of how highly Charlotte is valued. The commander urges them to stop holding back and treat the mansion as Charlotte's rightful home. As they move inside, he makes it explicit that this place now belongs to her. While Charlotte and the commander take in the room, the silver-haired man begins inspecting the house with a practical, appraising eye. He continues surveying the interior, measuring its scale and condition rather than being dazzled by it. After a moment of thought, he reaches a quiet conclusion about what the mansion really means. He points out that the residence, even down to the bedroom, is absurdly oversized for Charlotte alone, so he proposes assigning servants to maintain it, turning his concern into a concrete plan. The commander immediately suggests familiar attendants who would gladly serve Charlotte, making the arrangement feel personal rather than formal. The silver-haired man hesitates, aware he already owes the commander a great deal and reluctant to accept even more. Still, he decides to ask for something in return, shifting from gratitude to a request of his own. His favor leads them to the 17th Unit's private training grounds, where soldiers are already drilling. They watch recruits clash with wooden weapons in disciplined sparring matches. One trainee charges hard at a female opponent, trying to overwhelm her with force. She reads his movement instantly and seizes the opening. Their weapons collide, but the exchange breaks in her favor. She follows through with a decisive overhead strike that leaves him completely exposed. Realizing he is about to lose, the trainee panics under the pressure. Before the blow lands, he yields, and she halts the match cleanly. The end of the bout is marked and acknowledged, confirming her win. As she cools down, a companion praises her improvement, though she answers that she still has a long way to go. Her thoughts turn dark as she remembers a recent incident where she was powerless to do more than handle the aftermath. What haunts her most is the monstrous enemy she faced, a threat far beyond ordinary opponents. Frustrated by her own weakness, she demands another match, unable to accept that such a creature could even exist. That outburst is interrupted when someone announces the commander and Lady Charlotte have arrived. The commander enters with Charlotte and the silver-haired man, telling the trainees to continue as if this were routine. The female trainee immediately recognizes the silver-haired man as the one tied to that earlier incident. The sight of him jolts her into anger and alarm. Even while another spar begins, she cannot stop wondering why he has come here. Charlotte is gently led aside and settled in, while attention shifts to the real purpose of the visit. The silver-haired man asks the commander directly what he wants from him, sensing this visit was planned around a specific request. The commander answers plainly. He wants the silver-haired man to train the unit. He reminds him that he has already seen firsthand how ruthless Prince Tails can be. He explains that Prince Tails and Lady Charlotte are locked in a struggle for the throne. Because of that rivalry, Charlotte's future is dangerously uncertain and the prince could act at any time. The commander reveals that the only people who can truly protect Charlotte are the sworn members of the 7th unit. Since no one knows when the worst will come, he wants them hardened in advance for that moment. The silver-haired man watches the trainees in silence, weighing the request against what he sees. He notes that their movements are disciplined and their foundation is solid. Their exhausted bodies and relentless drills confirm that they already train seriously and often. But he also sees a limit in them that effort alone has not overcome. Their fatigue shows they are pushing themselves, yet still falling short of what true survival may demand. That realization stirs old memories in him, connecting their struggle to his own distant past. He remembers that long ago he too drove himself mercilessly in training. Back then, he was desperate to become an official government agent and forced himself forward with that single goal. He recalls training as if his life depended on it, revealing the brutal standard by which he now judges them. An officer calls the trainees together as the academy leadership arrives to address them. They announce that today's training will be improved by a visiting national hero who will serve as a special instructor. The blonde commander makes clear that this instructor is meant to supply what the students still lack, and the group answers with disciplined obedience. The silver-haired instructor silently sizes the trainees up before beginning. Many of the students are excited by his reputation and assume training under such a famous fighter will be easy and impressive. But one fierce trainee immediately stands out as exactly the kind of difficult student he expects to deal with. He begins by saying he wants to test their stamina. His first order is simple: everyone will run laps around the training grounds. Karina instantly objects, arguing that they already do that constantly and have no need to prove their endurance. She openly challenges the value of the exercise, forcing her classmates to rein her in before she goes too far. Rather than punish her, the commander singles Karina out by name. The instructor calmly apologizes and decides to change his method to suit her attitude. He removes his outer coat with complete confidence, signaling that the lesson is about to become personal. He steps forward into the yard as the trainees watch, turning the assessment into a direct demonstration. Confirming that Karina's preferred weapon is a spear, he prepares a test built around her own specialty. With a casual grip, he takes hold of a spear as if it were an extension of his hand. He invites Karina to attack him directly and prove herself by landing even a single hit. To raise the stakes, he declares there is no time limit, and if she succeeds once, she can skip the running entirely. He also exposes the real issue behind her defiance. She resents being trained by someone she assumes is weaker than she is. Karina accepts the provocation and tests whether he can truly handle a spear user like her. He answers by effortlessly deflecting her opening thrusts, showing that her confidence has not shaken him at all. Karina and the others are stunned to see her attacks turned aside so easily. Without even facing her fully, he controls the exchange and makes her look outclassed. He explains that there is no weapon he cannot use, turning the duel into a lesson about adaptability. A memory surfaces from 100 million years earlier, revealing the origin of that claim. In that earlier life, he trained his body relentlessly while mastering a spear through sheer repetition. He drove himself to strike and recover with precision, building skill through brutal discipline. Even then, someone observing him noted his shift to the spear, hinting that weapon choice was always deliberate for him. The younger version of him remained focused and unsentimental, treating training as necessity rather than passion. A bespectacled companion addressed him as Kagura and tried to draw him into an ordinary conversation. Kagura admitted he had once liked superhero shows as a child, but only because he was pressed for an answer. His companion praised him as the country's finest agent and suggested he deserved a break from constant training. Kagura refused, saying he had no time for leisure because his work repeatedly sent him into enemy organizations. He recalled missions where he was deployed empty-handed and had to seize whatever weapon was available on site. That experience taught him that survival depended on being able to master any weapon he picked up. His companion realizes that Kagura's relentless training is driven by the smallest possible increase in his odds of living through the next mission. Even so, that companion quietly vows that one day he will create something that spares Kagura from ever needing a weapon again. Back in the present, Karina charges hard, trying to overwhelm the instructor with speed and force. He meets her head-on and neutralizes the attack with clean timing instead of brute strength. His focus sharpens further as he reads her movements in detail. Their spears clash, and he breaks her momentum at the point of contact. Karina immediately follows with another strike, refusing to back down despite being controlled at every turn. For a moment she thinks she may have found an opening. He dismisses that hope by noting this is already her 15th straight loss, making clear that persistence alone is not enough. Humiliated but stubborn, Karina forces herself to keep going. She demands another round, determined to win through repetition if nothing else. This time she closes the distance more aggressively, trying to pressure him before he can reset. Her movement becomes sharp enough to make the exchange genuinely dangerous. He recognizes that her attack speed and reactions are actually impressive, even if her judgment is still lacking. Karina commits to a full power swing, screaming through the effort as the duel reaches another peak. A silver-haired instructor gauges his opponent's strength and realizes that every swing of her spear carries real force. The red-haired beastkin woman presses the attack, taking his composure as proof that evolved humans truly are formidable. Even so, he immediately sees a flaw in her fighting. He redirects the exchange with precise control, sending a spear point skidding in a way that breaks her momentum. Caught off guard, she is forced back as his counter stops her cold. He ends the bout without strain and declares that this is enough. She refuses to accept defeat and insists she can still continue. He dismisses that resolve as meaningless. Turning away, he bluntly explains that her problem is stamina, not effort, and that pushing harder will not fix it. As the others watch from a distance, he confirms his suspicion that she simply cannot endure prolonged combat. In his judgment, her raw physical gifts only mask poor fundamentals and unrefined movement. He compares her to fighters from another era and concludes that this age leans too heavily on spirit magic instead of bodily training. That thought is reinforced by memories of warriors who relied on supernatural power in battle. Measured against the standards he knows, modern physical ability seems badly underdeveloped. He decides her training must begin with basic endurance work and pointedly asks if she has any objection. Humiliated and exhausted, she can only swallow her frustration. When he offers to help her up, she is still baffled that he defeated her so easily without even breaking a sweat. Despite her pride, she admits to herself that she has no choice but to accept one fact. She recognizes that he is genuinely strong, while he remains puzzled by her sudden silence. She steadies herself, still wrestling with that reluctant acknowledgement. At last she takes his hand and accepts both his help and his authority. With the spar over, he casually moves on to the next phase of her training. The onlookers are stunned when he proposes starting with simple roadwork, revealing how basic and severe his regimen will be. Elsewhere, the story shifts from the training grounds to a darker part of the city. A sinister raven-like messenger signals the approach of something secretive and dangerous. A blonde nobleman in a dark cloak arrives carrying a lantern, moving with purpose through the gloom. He opens the way into a hidden cell. Inside, a shackled beast-man prisoner waits in silence, already aware that an important visitor has come. The prisoner recognizes the newcomer as a major figure and understands that this meeting matters. The blonde man reveals he has come not for courtesy, but to speak with the mind behind the recent incident. The prisoner identifies him as Lord Rudman. Even in chains, the prisoner refuses to cooperate, and claims he has nothing to say. Rudman notes the man's unusual calm and suspects he is still plotting something. He presses further, making it clear he doubts the prisoner is finished making moves. Rudman then warns that even if the prisoner survives this crisis, his royal family will not escape destruction. As if to justify that threat, he reaches for a hidden object. He produces a glowing artifact and suggests that this power could decide everything. The prisoner is jolted out of his composure the moment he sees it. He blurts out that such a thing should be impossible for Rudman to possess. Rudman reveals it to be a corruptor weapon, a tool said to draw on the power of a corruptor. He accuses the prisoner of using a similar weapon to trigger the recent incident and expose the royal family. The prisoner falters, and Rudman seizes on that fear to take control of the conversation. Then Rudman makes his true move. Since the prisoner despises the Kermosia royal family, he proposes that they join forces. He argues that the current rulers are too naive and that the kingdom will otherwise burn and fall to foreign powers. The prisoner is horrified that a royal himself would seek the destruction of his own house, but Rudman confirms it without hesitation. Rudman envisions rebuilding the nation through fire into a harsher, stronger, more authoritarian state under his rule. To make that vision real, he says, he needs the prisoner's dangerous power. After weighing the offer, the prisoner agrees in principle, though he no longer expects to be crowned king in this new order. Rudman accepts that concession and demands only one thing in return: absolute loyalty to him alone. When the prisoner questions that demand, Rudman confirms it and implies that obedience will be rewarded if he proves useful. A scheming noble dismisses the value of an oath and decides to exploit a subordinate before discarding him once he is no longer useful. Certain the royal bloodline must be wiped out, he accepts a pledge of loyalty while secretly preparing betrayal. A blonde, sharp-smiling aristocrat seizes on that pledge and turns the man's own oath into a trap. He activates a sinister artifact, unleashing a corrupting force through the object in his hand. The victim realizes too late that something has gone terribly wrong and is overwhelmed by fear. As the artifact's power takes hold, he is engulfed by hypnotic magic he cannot resist. The blonde lord explains that the corruptor weapon implants a powerful suggestion in anyone who hears a chosen trigger phrase. He adds that even a careless lie can be rewritten in the victim's mind as sincere intent, leaving the enthralled man mentally broken. Reduced to submission, the man kneels before his new master inside the prison-like hall. Under compulsion, he offers absolute obedience and addresses the blonde noble as his liege. The noble savors the humiliation, disgusted that someone of such low blood ever tried to rival the royal family. He declares that people like this are nothing more than tools for his use. In his arrogance, he insists that neither Charlotte nor the nation's current rulers deserve power, because he alone should lead the country. Elsewhere, the story shifts to a training ground where a young man reflects that this nation ought to be under his leadership. The training session winds down as the runners slow to a stop. Jean, flushed from exertion, realizes that running feels unexpectedly good. Satisfied, he decides to call it a day. Looking back, he sees the others collapse from exhaustion and jokes that the scene looks absurdly overdone. A blonde knight apologizes for pushing the pace too hard, but Jean takes it well and admits the exercise exposed his poor stamina. The knight explains that constant travel by horse and frequent reliance on spirit magic have left him neglecting his endurance. He resolves to focus on building his stamina for a while, and Jean agrees with the plan. Before leaving, Jean remembers something important and turns serious. Princess Charlotte notices and asks whether he was about to head back. Though she pretends mild concern about him being scolded if he lingers, she is clearly trying to stop him for a reason. She asks for a moment before Lord Jean leaves, saying she has something she needs to show him. Charlotte reaches into a pouch and prepares to reveal the hidden object. She produces a grotesque red mechanical relic, and its appearance immediately shocks Jean. The sight triggers a grim memory in him, and he instantly recognizes it as something dangerous. When he asks what it is, Charlotte explains that it was secretly confiscated from Lord Ludman. She identifies Ludman as one of the main conspirators behind the recent incident. Jean names the object an invasive relic, a demonic tool that amplifies the invader's power. He admits no one knows who created such relics or how they are made, only that they are tied to grotesque invader technology. That realization leaves him disturbed into silence. He is unsettled that something like this is circulating in the present era at all. Studying it more closely, he concludes it is a machine built by embedding invader parts into a mechanical body. Charlotte notices from his reaction that he truly knows it, and Jean reveals he saw something similar beneath the academy. He recalls judging that earlier device too dangerous to leave intact and destroying it on the spot. The blonde knight realizes that must have been the device responsible for the entire incident they just survived. Charlotte agrees that destroying it was wise since the enemy would likely have recovered it otherwise. Still, she wants to investigate this confiscated relic further on her side as well. She asks Jean to share any information he uncovers, and he readily accepts. As Charlotte departs with her guards, Jean watches her go while turning over the meaning of an invasive relic in his mind. He warns that they cannot allow another disaster like this, and that they must stay vigilant, and the knight agrees. When the knight notices his unease, Jean brushes it off, though his mind is clearly elsewhere. He remembers that invaders once rampaged endlessly, and that people of the time blamed the invasive relic for driving them. But he rejects that old explanation, recalling monsters that looked as if they were waiting for orders rather than acting mindlessly. Their movements had been coordinated, even using teleportation in formation, making him question whether relic power alone could explain them. The word coordinated catches in his thoughts as a new possibility begins to form. A memory surfaces of a researcher warning that, alongside environmental changes, evolved corruptors had begun to appear. That warning connects to an image of a humanoid corruptor directing a beast, suggesting the enemy may now be organized rather than merely unleashed. A woman radiating ominous purple power appears, suggesting the threat they faced was no ordinary enemy. Jean reflects that if such a being could truly control others, the implications are too dangerous to accept easily. 4 days later, the crisis has passed and life resumes at Harnick Academy, though the aftermath still weighs on everyone. The headmaster admits he was detained for a full week and is only now regaining control of the school. A holy knight formally thanks him for cooperating, while the headmaster bitterly insists he was blamed for something he did not cause. Even so, the headmaster concedes that enemies really had infiltrated the academy, making him feel responsible for failing to catch them sooner. The knight tries to ease that guilt, but the headmaster insists the disaster would have been irreversible if Jean had not intervened. Jean brushes off the praise and downplays his role in preventing the academy's collapse. The headmaster reveals he investigated Jean after hearing the news and learned that Jean had only taken the instructor job temporarily while traveling, with backing connected to the Holy Knights. Jean confirms it and dryly notes that he never expected someone like the headmaster to end up owing him his life. Moved by that truth, the headmaster rises from his seat with sudden resolve. He bows deeply and offers sincere gratitude for saving both the country and his students. Jean accepts the thanks quietly, without making more of it than necessary. As the tension softens, the conversation turns from gratitude to what comes next. The headmaster asks whether Jean intends to keep teaching at the academy despite the infiltration being unrelated to his original goal. Jean admits he only meant to work there long enough to earn travel money. He explains that another reward from the recent incident has already solved that problem, so he no longer needs the position for income. The knight offers to find a replacement, but Jean immediately rejects the idea. The headmaster reminds him that he accepted the post of his own will and now expects him to honor that responsibility. The knight agrees that abandoning the class on the first day would be unfair to the students, and Jean cannot really argue with that. Still reluctant, Jean tries to protest, but the headmaster cuts him off before he can escape the obligation. With a knowing smile, the headmaster tells them to follow him. He leads Jean and the knight through the academy halls toward an unseen destination. On the way, Jean asks what became of Professor Gita, the man tied to the earlier trouble. The knight recognizes the name at once and understands exactly who Jean means. They reveal that Gita remains in custody, loudly proclaiming his innocence from behind bars. His captors add that he has been ranting to himself and obsessing over schemes to disgrace Jean. The knight suspects Gita is more pathetic than dangerous and suggests releasing him, but the matter is not that simple. The headmaster points out that Gita did try to frame Jean, so letting him cool off first is the safer choice. More importantly, the headmaster says they have arrived at the real reason he brought Jean along. He opens the door and invites Jean inside. Jean is caught completely off guard by what he sees. A student notices him first, her surprise turning instantly into recognition. The room is packed with students who have clearly gathered in anticipation of his arrival. When Jean asks what this is, the headmaster explains that every one of them came for him. Word has already spread that Jean was the hero who saved the kingdom, and the students are openly thrilled to see their instructor. Not everyone is pleased, however, and at least one student reacts with visible resentment. She criticizes the others for suddenly acting close to Jean now that he is famous, only to be reminded that she has little room to judge. Before the mood can turn sour, a blue-haired student steps forward and says she has something important to tell Jean. She confesses that on the day of the incident, she skipped class to wander into town. There, something made her stop and realize she was in danger. She found herself confronted by a monstrous creature far beyond what she could handle alone. Certain she was about to die, she remembers having no strength to resist until help arrived at the last moment. Jean cut the monster down and saved her before it could kill her. Now back at the academy, she thanks him from the bottom of her heart. Other students quickly add that they owe him their gratitude as well. The headmaster gently points out that this response is exactly what Jean has inspired in them. Surrounded by students asking him to stay, Jean is told that whatever his private reasons may be, he should teach them at least once in a while. At last, Jean relents and accepts his role as their instructor. Elsewhere, the story shifts abruptly to a rain-soaked ruined street and the ominous mention of 100 million, hinting at a new threat already taking shape. Jean, battered and tense, latches onto a new threat as the term corruptors is raised. A government scientist confirms that corruptors are now the official designation for these beings. The team understands the name as monsters born from decay and moral ruin, a fitting label for what they face. The scientist explains that these creatures can only function in heavily polluted areas. Sana presses the implication, and the answer comes back grimly certain. If pollution keeps spreading, humanity will eventually have nowhere left to escape them. That conclusion leaves Jean silent, weighed down by the scale of the crisis. Sana notices his shaken state and pointedly reminds him that this fear is unlike his usual self. The others back her up, teasing him lightly to snap him out of his doubt. Jean admits the difference this time is that they are no longer fighting people, but monsters they can barely even define. Their enemy has already proven capable of surviving even missile strikes, making the threat feel overwhelming. That reality pushes the team to ask the question none of them can avoid, whether they have any chance at all. Seeing Jean sink further into himself, Sana steps in directly. She physically forces his attention back to her instead of letting him spiral. Sana reminds him that he is the strongest agent their country has and refuses to let him collapse now. She tells him to keep wearing the same fearless expression he always has, lending him her confidence. Trying to build a path forward, she argues that if the environment is purified, the corruptors should lose their ability to act, and the scientist agrees that this is likely. The scientist reveals that another division is developing a device meant to restore the contaminated environment. So the battle becomes a matter of endurance. Humanity only needs to hold out until that device is complete. Sana immediately reframes the impossible situation into a familiar mission. They just have to keep the enemy at bay like they always do. Her certainty finally reaches Jean, and he begins to steady himself. She answers his unspoken hesitation by insisting his resolve is still enough. That reassurance gives way to the memory of a brutal battlefield where one of their comrades had already fallen. The scene of the dead and dying makes clear how costly that fight had been. In the rain-soaked ruins, Jean stood alone among the bodies, still alive but surrounded by defeat. Even then, he was barely holding himself upright. Bloodied and exhausted, Jean looked like he had reached the edge of his strength. Then he heard a weak voice and realized Sana had survived. He rushed to her as she acknowledged his survival with grim, unsurprised relief. Jean tried to help her immediately, but Sana knew her wounds were already beyond saving. Instead of asking for rescue, she made him listen and gripped him tightly to force the moment into his heart. Her final plea was not for him to become a savior, but simply to refuse to give up against the corruptors. Jean took that charge in silence as she urged him to keep fighting until the very end. He remained with her in the rain, absorbing the weight of her last words. Afterward, Jean contacted Kagura and asked if she could hear him. He declared that he would undergo the nanomachine-based human experimentation project. Even warned that incompatibility would kill him, he accepted it, reasoning that continuing as he was meant death anyway. What mattered to him was the promise he had just inherited. He would not give up. That vow carries into a later night, where a white-haired young man jolts awake from sleep. Disoriented, he realizes he has been reliving something that felt less like a dream and more like a buried memory. His attention falls on a glowing cube nearby, an object tied to that past. He picks it up carefully, as if reconnecting with something he has long carried inside him. With calm resolve, he assures himself that he has not forgotten. A projection of Jean and his old companions appears, and he renews the promise to reclaim a world free of corruptors. He commits himself completely, no matter how long fulfilling that promise will take. The story then shifts to the fortress city of Malmos in the northeastern Kermosia kingdom, where an urgent summons rings out. A messenger rushes in to report an emergency to the city's defenders. He warns that an enemy force is advancing from the northern nation of Bielhart, but his commander has already seen it. The Holy Knight's Grand Master, Glen Oz, calmly confirms the threat from the battlements. Beyond the city, a vast hostile army is already surging toward Malmös. A swarm of grotesque corruptors closes in, surrounding the area with overwhelming numbers. The monsters surge forward as the pressure of the attack rapidly escalates. Two knights realize they are badly outnumbered, and the younger one anxiously waits for the veteran's decision. The older knight calmly gathers spirit power, choosing to answer the horde with a single concentrated strike. He unleashes that power upward in a towering blast meant to wipe the field clean at once. The beam collides with a strange purple force, but his attack pushes through instead of being stopped. In an instant, the mass of corruptors is erased under the descending column of light. Even the veteran is stunned that the creatures vanished so completely. He immediately orders his subordinate to report this anomaly to the king while he remains behind to investigate further. As he thinks it through, he identifies the creatures as corruptors that amplify spirit magic, but notes that they have never appeared in such numbers before. Elsewhere, a dark-haired figure commanding corruptors stands amid them as if leading the outbreak. He is caught off guard by the sudden loss of his forces and struggles to understand what happened to them. The scene shifts to the Royal Capital Library, where another thread of the mystery is being pursued through research. A silver-haired man searches the library intensely, comparing books in hopes of finding useful information. He concludes that the records here contain very little on corruptors, leaving him frustrated. What he does find reduces them to vague accounts of monsters appearing near human settlements since ancient times, often linked to blight and destruction. With so little certainty, he wonders whether corruptors hide somewhere in the world or simply emerge on their own. A nearby student dismisses that line of thought and insists the environment itself has improved enough that such creatures should not be appearing more often. The silver-haired man decides his best lead is Kagura, a lifelong researcher of corruptors who may have left useful notes behind. From the records, he infers that if the creatures are not tied to a treatment facility, they may be spreading from remote settlements, and he starts considering where to go next. A sudden commotion nearby pulls his attention away from the books. He turns to find a group of students gathered around a tense confrontation. One girl is being mocked and blamed, while another cruelly implies that everyone resents her presence. He recognizes the accused girl as the one who had been with Hakama. When she tries to defend herself by saying she had permission to be there, her accuser makes clear that legality is not the real issue. The hostility sharpens into an accusation that she is responsible for bringing a dangerous disease among them. The attack becomes personal as they insist the spreading illness is her fault. Watching from the shelves, the silver-haired man decides he cannot ignore this any longer. Before he can step in, a new voice cuts through the room and coolly calls attention to the girl's behavior. Princess Charlotte arrives with guards and politely but firmly reminds them that a library is not the place for this kind of scene. The students are instantly shaken by the princess's appearance. When one of them tries to justify herself by pointing at the accused girl, Charlotte makes it clear she will not entertain excuses. Her warning turns icy as she repeats that silence is expected here, ending the confrontation on her terms. Once the others retreat, Charlotte gently checks on the girl, Kudo, who is left shaken but composed. Kudo thanks Charlotte for always protecting her, and Charlotte reassures her that she need not apologize for needing help. From a distance, the silver-haired man realizes Charlotte resolved the matter before he had to intervene. Charlotte notices him watching. She approaches him warmly, greeting him as Sir Jean and treating their meeting as a pleasant surprise. When he wonders why a princess is here, Charlotte explains that she often visits the library to broaden her knowledge. She adds that the library holds far more books than the royal castle, making it the better place to study. Seeing his research materials, Charlotte asks whether he is investigating something as well. Jean confirms that he is trying to decide where to travel next, and Charlotte asks if he has chosen a destination. He shows her a map and says he is considering the northeastern frontier, specifically the region around the Plutza territory. At the mention of Fortress City Malmös, Kudo reacts immediately, revealing a personal connection to the place. She urgently tells Jean not to go there. Charlotte turns to Kudo, and Jean asks her to explain her warning. Struggling to say it, Kudo insists that no matter how strong he is, strength will not help him there. She reveals the real danger. What threatens that place is disease, not an enemy that can simply be fought. Jean acknowledges that illness in this era is a serious threat without proper medicine, but he still wants to understand more. Charlotte formally introduces the girl as Kudo Plutza, making clear that the territory Jean plans to visit is her home. Charlotte is introduced as the heir to the Plutza County territory, a noble daughter with close ties to the royal bloodline. When asked what kind of disease is spreading, the silver-haired princess decides it will be clearer to show Charlotte directly, catching her off guard. Charlotte urgently presents Sir Jean as someone who can help, insisting he is exactly the person they need. The princess agrees and asks Charlotte to come with her. They head to Kermosia Castle, where the crisis has already reached the royal household. The princess leads the way into a sealed room. Inside, Charlotte and Sir Jean are brought before a bedridden patient under close watch, and the sight immediately alarms them. The princess reveals that the patient is her younger sister and the third princess of the kingdom. The dying girl struggles through fever and pain long enough to identify herself as Paris Kermosia. Sir Jean instantly realizes the condition is something he recognizes. The corruption spreading across the princess's neck confirms his suspicion. The princess explains that this disease is spreading through Malmos and has not spared even the royal capital. The scale of the disaster is already catastrophic, with thousands dead and the toll still rising. She describes how the illness begins with relentless fever and escalating pain that destroys the body once symptoms appear. Worse, no cure is known, and it always ends in death, which Sir Jean grimly admits he already understands. He identifies the illness with certainty as corruption, a mutation syndrome. The princess explains that corruption rapidly mutates the body until it can no longer survive the changes. She recalls that a similar epidemic devastated the world 1,000,000 years ago and killed countless people. Even knowing Sir Jean has unusual power, the court physician warns Charlotte not to get too close, and the princess quietly accepts the danger. When Sir Jean asks about divine power, the princess explains that those who possess it are highly resistant to the disease. To keep order in Malmos, the kingdom has stationed its strongest divine power user there. That guardian is the Grand Master of the Holy Knights, whose immense power is meant to stabilize the situation. Sir Jean concludes that his own nanomachines are probably purging the pathogen in his body, which is why he remains unharmed. He asks Charlotte if she was infected, and she admits she was not, likely because she also possesses divine power. But Charlotte is crushed by guilt and fears she may have brought the disease into the royal capital. She blames herself further, believing Princess Paris was infected through contact with her because Paris lacks divine power. The princess firmly rejects that guilt, reminding Charlotte that she arrived for academy enrollment before the outbreak even began. She tells Charlotte to stop blaming herself and tries to steady her. The princess promises they will find a cure and urges Charlotte to hold on to that hope. The physician pushes back, pointing out that doctors are already falling to the disease and that most of them have no divine protection. He argues that anyone who might be a carrier must be quarantined, including Charlotte and Lady Paris. The princess resists, insisting quarantine will not be necessary once a cure is found, because the country will be destroyed first at the current rate. Sir Jean cuts through the argument by declaring that the proposed treatment is useless because the disease is not caused by a virus or bacteria. He reveals that corruption is a parasitic infection caused by invisible corruptors, making ordinary medicine ineffective. Having reached his conclusion, Sir Jean steps forward to act. Blue energy erupts around him as he prepares to intervene personally. The physician lashes out in outrage, demanding to know how Sir Jean dares act so freely toward royalty. The princess, startled by his sudden move, calls out to Sir Jean. Sir Jean calmly asks them to move aside. Ignoring their protests, he approaches the sick princess's bedside with power gathering in his hands. As Paris gasps for breath, the hopeless truth remains that corruption has no known cure. Sir Jean counters that if the patient is a human from this era, the situation may not be hopeless after all. He begins channeling his power directly into Paris despite the strain it causes her. The physician tries to stop him again, furious that he would experiment on a princess, but Sir Jean refuses to back down. He asks them to entrust Paris to him if they truly have no other way to save her. While working, he explains that corruption normally kills within 3 days. He reasons that Paris has survived this long only because humans of this era carry a small amount of nanomachines in their bodies. That means there is still a chance to save her. Sir Jean decides the first step is to halt the regeneration of the infectious corruptors inside her body, even though doing so will heavily burden her. He prepares the next phase of treatment at the same time, shifting his power into a new form. A white-haired man begins an emergency treatment on the unconscious princess, forcing electrical stimulation through her body to bring her back. He realizes the real danger is only starting, because reviving her will require pushing the treatment much further. The princess's body convulses in agony as the current surges through her. Watching her suffer, the royal physician Zeal loses patience and accuses the man of harming the princess. The princess's sister tries to stop Zeal, but he refuses to back down from what he sees as his duty. Zeal charges him with a blade, threatening to kill the stranger if he does not step away immediately. Even with death rushing at him, the man keeps his focus on the treatment instead of defending himself. He makes it clear that he has no intention of abandoning the princess now. Zeal commits to the attack and calls for support as he brings the weapon down. The princess's sister can only watch in horror as blood suddenly flies. Kudo is equally shocked, realizing the confrontation has turned deadly. Zeal freezes in disbelief when he sees what happened. The man has taken the blow on himself while continuing the procedure, and he demands to know why Zeal keeps interfering. He explains that his real fight is not with the people in the room but with the corruptors inside the princess. To the others, he reveals that the illness comes from microscopic corruptors too small to be seen normally. He says the spirits within the princess are battling those corruptors at that very moment. If he stops now, he warns, everything done to save her will be wasted. He adds that the electrical output must be controlled precisely, because her body cannot survive a mistake. His plan is to weaken the corruptors to the edge of what the princess can endure, then trust his nanomachines to finish them off. Though strained and sweating, he stays committed to the risky balance the treatment requires. As the princess's body reacts again, he decides to push forward. The princess weakly reaches out and touches him, showing the treatment is finally drawing a response from her. Moved by that sign of life, the princess's sister begs Jean to save her. Zeal accepts responsibility for attacking him and offers to face punishment later if the princess can be saved first. The sister dismisses blame for now and orders everyone to focus on helping Jean. She recruits Steel's healing magic, and Kudo also steps forward to assist. Together they surround the bed and combine their efforts to support Jin's treatment through the night. By dawn, Zeal is still working beside Jean, exhausted but committed. Kudo and Jean continue channeling their power into the princess as the final stage of the treatment drags on. Night gives way to morning while the struggle to save her continues without rest. At sunrise, the long ordeal finally reaches its end. The room falls quiet with everyone collapsed from exhaustion, waiting to see whether the princess survived. The princess begins to stir and murmurs faintly as consciousness returns. She wakes abruptly, confused but alive. Jean greets her calmly, confirming that she has made it through. Disoriented, she asks who he is, and her sister rushes to her side. Her sister anxiously checks her condition while the princess recognizes her at last. Jean assures them that the princess is going to be alright now. Zeal can hardly believe it, admitting her condition had been so severe that she had not even sat up for 2 weeks. Overcome with guilt, Zeal wonders how he could ever make amends for attacking the man who saved her. Jean brushes it off with humor, saying he can take it and that Zeal should simply strengthen his next treatment. Zeal is stunned by how casually Jean dismisses an injury that should have been serious. The princess's sister addresses Jean with renewed gravity, preparing to speak formally. She bows and declares that the royal family now owes him a debt they can never fully repay. Through tears, she swears that whatever happens in the future, she will always stand at his side. Jean gently asks her to lift her head, while the newly awakened princess watches the exchange in silence. Seeing her sister's devotion to him leaves the princess flustered and quietly unsettled. Kudo checks on her, and the princess brightens immediately when she recognizes her. When Kudo asks if she is truly alright, the princess answers that she is, with surprising confidence. With the princess recovered, Zeal urges the court to spread the news across the kingdom at once, and her sister happily agrees. Kudo's companion eagerly suggests they can use this chance to visit his hometown as well. Kudo immediately rejects the idea that a simple visit will solve anything. When pressed, he reminds them that the plague's true cause is the corruptors. He concludes that the only answer is to destroy the source spreading the disease. Since he had already intended to go there, this revelation gives him even more reason to act. He rises and commits the group to marching on Fortress City Melmose to eliminate the source directly. The story shifts to Melmose, a city already scarred by disaster. In the ruined city, someone bitterly reflects that nearly all of their forces were wiped out. A badly wounded Beastman Knight struggles to stay standing amid the aftermath of battle. Seeing a mysterious figure before him, he can only wonder whether this being is even human. The answer appears in the form of a humanoid corruptor radiating unnatural power. Rather than finishing the knight, the creature turns to unseen allies and proposes using him instead. Another voice agrees that the survivor could be useful. A bespectacled man decides they should take the wounded knight back with them. 1 week later, Kudo's party rides across the desert toward Melmose with reinforcements. As they near the city, one escort doubts that the small protective scrap they carry can truly keep them safe. Kudo answers that it is only a precaution, but still better than nothing. When asked whether leaving the royal capital exposed is wise, the group accepts that the crisis has left them no choice. A veteran explains that the Grand Master has formally requested reinforcements, and the 7th unit owes him a great debt. Kudo adds that for the Grand Master to ask for help at all means the nation is facing a grave emergency. Their discussion ends when they finally reach Melmose. For Kudo's companion, the sight of Melmose confirms they have arrived at her hometown. Inside the city, they find damage and rubble, but not the total collapse they feared. The blonde knight notes that he had expected a far worse swarm of corruptors. The group realizes the Grand Master must have protected the city from complete destruction. They split responsibilities, sending Liat to treat the wounded. Kudo's companion is told to arrange a meeting with the local lord, and she agrees at once. As Kudo surveys the streets, he notices ordinary residents still moving through the city. That only sharpens his concern, because he senses that many of those people are already infected. The infection is subtle enough that even routine exchanges between citizens continue as if nothing is wrong. Kudo concludes that the source of the corruption must still be somewhere in Melmose. The battered fortress around them reinforces how hard the city has already been hit. Soon, Kudo and his companions are received indoors for a formal meeting. Their host greets them and thanks them for coming all this way. Before the meeting can settle, Kudo's companion suddenly recognizes someone in the room. The sight shocks her so badly that she can barely believe who she is seeing. The injured lord of the Plutza territory, Gain Plutza, weakly asks Kudo why he has returned. Kudo's companion is shaken by how devastated her homeland has become. Gain nearly collapses, and his elderly father has to support him. Despite his condition, Gain reveals he already knows the rumors that Kudo is now the Grand Master's most trusted man. The blonde knight respectfully accepts that acknowledgement. Kudo then asks for the Grand Master, only to learn he has been missing since the last battle. The news stuns the party. Gain explains that a week earlier a massive horde of corruptors invaded from the north, and the Grand Master destroyed most of them. The defenders had believed his overwhelming strength would carry the day. But Gain then reveals the shocking rumor that the Grand Master was defeated by a humanoid corruptor. That description matches the terrifying being seen in the earlier battle. When asked what happened next, Gain explains that before anyone understood the situation, both the Grand Master and the corruptors were gone. The blonde knight struggles to accept that someone powerful enough to seize the Grand Master could exist. Before the implications can settle, Gain's father suddenly coughs up blood, turning the meeting into a new emergency. A badly afflicted noble, Lord Argus, uses what strength he has left to make an urgent request. He orders the uninfected people in the territory to be evacuated south before the front collapses. He explains that the plague has already spread too far for this place to remain safe. Knowing he is already failing, he warns that an enemy attack could come at any moment. As he begins entrusting his daughter to the others, attention shifts to whether Jean can do anything for him. Jean calmly states that curing Argus himself is possible. Argus is stunned, unable to believe anyone could cure what has consumed him. Before offering help, Jean insists on properly identifying himself. He introduces himself as Shido Jean. When Jean reveals he is a spirit magic instructor from the royal capital, Argus instinctively looks down on him as a mere teacher from an inferior race. Even so, Argus clutches his chest and listens, caught between pain and doubt. He admits he wants to believe, but insists this disease is beyond any cure. Jean counters that even divine power has failed because the sickness is not mystical in origin but caused by nanomachines acting as a kind of resistance. He explains that once too many of these corruptors enter a body, infection is inevitable regardless of personal power. That means the entire land itself has been contaminated on a microscopic level. Jean realizes that curing one man alone would change nothing unless he also deals with the source and the environment. Having reached that conclusion, he decides to act on a larger scale. The others tense up, but Jean tells them to leave it to him. He steps into the center of the room and prepares a spell while the others watch. Choosing the room as his focal point, he begins setting the operation in motion. For a moment he questions whether he can manage it, then forces himself past that hesitation. He resolves that he must be able to do it, and starts drawing in power. Argus, alarmed, demands to know what Jean intends. Jean commands the spirits to gather. His call reaches out across the surrounding fields as particles of spirit energy begin converging. More and more spirits answer, flooding the area with light. As the power builds, Jean remembers how helpless he was in the royal capital against enemies spread over a wide battlefield. He uses that frustration as resolve, determined to become capable of handling threats on that scale. This time he focuses on collecting the scattered nanomachines across a broad region and bringing them under control. The gathering effect reaches the wounded outside, where healers and civilians notice the strange influx of light. Even the infected commoners sense that something unprecedented is happening around them. From above, the streams of gathered energy spread through the city in sweeping arcs. Seeing the phenomenon fill the room, Argus realizes Jean is doing something far beyond ordinary magic. The strain hits Jean hard, and he nearly buckles under the burden of controlling so much at once. His vision blurs as the scale of the spell pushes him to his limit. The others rush toward him in alarm, fearing he is collapsing. Jean steadies himself and admits the drain is far worse than he expected, meaning he still lacks sufficient training. When asked what he actually did, he explains that he summoned and concentrated the spirits from the atmosphere into this area. By saturating the region with them, he says, the cause of the disease should now be suppressed and no new victims should fall to it. Argus is left shaken by the fact that Jean gathered atmospheric spirits on such an enormous scale. Even the knight can only wonder what kind of man Jean really is. Outside, the fortress and its surroundings remain wrapped in the lingering flow of gathered spirit power. Elsewhere, someone observing the fortress notices that the spreading contamination has begun to disappear during Jin's brief absence. The observer reports the change and asks what should be done now that their work is being undone. The response comes with immediate certainty. Their side decides the only answer is to stop whoever is interfering. Meanwhile, the city shifts into emergency relief, with soldiers guarding a treatment tent as civilians gather around it. Inside, healers begin tending the infected under the new conditions Jean created. One healer works carefully but with visible relief, suggesting the treatment is finally becoming manageable. Across the fortress, organized treatment begins in earnest as the city moves from despair toward recovery. The group learns that although they are short-staffed, the infection should fade within a month. The recovering victim can barely believe he has truly survived the ordeal. Jean accepts the gratitude calmly, and downplays his role in saving him. Others praise Kudo's master as extraordinary, confirming how decisive Jin's intervention was. Jean refuses to treat the crisis as over and insists they still have to remove its source. Kudo immediately presses him for leads on what that source could be. They review how the disease began spreading after the corruptors invaded the land, making the monsters the obvious first suspects. Kudo points out that the corruptors had almost never breached their defenses, except once when the Grand Master was captured. From that, Jean concludes the true cause must have been hidden there long before the invasion. Kudo hesitates because no suspicious outsiders had ever been reported in the area. That contradiction suddenly gives him an idea. He realizes there is one place they never considered investigating. After a tense pause, he identifies the overlooked location. The answer shocks Jean. The source may be underground. The group heads below with a torch, following that lead into the hidden depths. As they advance through the underground passage, Jean studies the surroundings for confirmation. He senses they are close to something important. They arrive at a massive sealed door tied to the underground research facility Kagura left behind. Kudo explains this is the only place they were never able to inspect. The facility's existence has long been known, but no one ever discovered how to open it. Jean calls for confirmation from his companion and prepares to test the lock himself. His authority is recognized at the highest level, and the ancient system unlocks the door for him. The others are stunned as the impossible entrance opens without resistance. Kudo is shaken because the door had remained sealed no matter what they tried before. He begins to question who Jean really is if the facility obeys him. Jean puts that aside, promising answers later and focusing everyone on what lies within. They step into the hidden chamber to see whether the underground theory was right. The sight inside horrifies the young woman, who covers her mouth in shock. The others confirm to Jean that his suspicion was exactly right. Jean realizes the truth with grim certainty. At the center of the room stands a corruptor weapon, the real source of the outbreak. The machine vents ominously, showing it is still active. Its corruption has been producing and releasing monsters from within the facility. Jean moves at once, gathering power to shut it down before it can spread further. The group recognizes beyond doubt that this device is what caused everything. The girl demands to know why something so dangerous was hidden beneath their home. Jean connects it to the disaster at the royal capital and realizes this is the same kind of threat on a smaller scale. He concludes someone deliberately brought the giant corruptor technology into this underground lab. Even without knowing who did it, he decides the priority is destroying it immediately. Determined not to repeat his earlier mistake, Jean begins dismantling the device himself. He unleashes a concentrated attack into the machine to erase it at the source. His ally watches tensely, sensing the destruction may trigger a backlash. A sudden warning cuts through the room and halts the moment. The device erupts with a violent purple counterattack, forcing everyone to dive away. The blonde knight throws himself forward to intercept the blast and protect the others. He raises a radiant barrier that catches the dark projectiles before they can tear through the group. Holding the line alone, he turns defense into offense and prepares a decisive strike. He draws his sword, charging it with crackling golden power. With one sweeping slash, he sends a blazing arc straight through the corruptor weapon. The strike smashes into the machine and detonates its core, finally destroying the source underground. A surge of violent purple energy erupts as someone seizes and channels a dangerous power. The force swells into a massive attack, bearing down on the blonde armored fighter before he can react. Caught in the glow, he realizes too late that the threat is far greater than expected. A white-haired man steps in and stops the blast with his own power, shielding the others from the impact. As the attack disperses, the group braces and demands to know who has entered their space. Their answer comes from above as a new figure descends, wrapped in the same ominous purple energy. The intruder reveals himself as a dark, long-haired man whose presence alone throws the room into alarm. The blonde fighter openly challenges him, while the white-haired man falls silent in sudden recognition. Seeing the intruder's face, the white-haired man is shaken by the impossible sight of someone he knows. The newcomer notes that the white-haired man is not alone and immediately treats the others as meaningful support. A bespectacled man steps forward from the shadows and addresses the white-haired man, Jean, as if they share history. Jean stares at him in disbelief, unable to accept what he is seeing. The man with glasses calmly identifies the dark warrior as Kagura, turning Jin's shock into certainty. Jin's disbelief hardens into tension as he struggles to reconcile memory with the man before him. The bespectacled man remains composed, clearly in control of the encounter. He mocks Jin's confusion and makes it clear he intends to answer only on his own terms. While Jin's allies move to defend him, the man promises a simple explanation. With a smile, he prepares to demonstrate rather than merely talk. He unleashes a blazing golden attack toward the group, forcing an immediate response. Even as the strike flies, he stays relaxed, confident the exchange is unfolding exactly as he wants. Kagura intercepts the blast head-on, proving he is acting alongside the bespectacled man. The man chides Kagura for reacting so harshly, speaking to him with familiarity and authority. The blonde fighter is stunned that the attack was blocked so easily, while Jean studies the contradiction in front of him. Jean rejects the claim outright, insisting the man before him cannot truly be Kagura. The bespectacled man counters that if Jean knows details only the real Kagura should know, then the truth cannot be dismissed so easily. Pressed by his ally, Jean admits the resemblance is too exact to ignore. He reveals the key fact: the man lived in the same era as he did and is one of the ancients. Realizing the danger is escalating beyond prediction, Jean orders the two women to evacuate at once. As they retreat, Jean demands that the supposed Kagura explain what he is trying to accomplish. The answer points to a machine saturated with purple energy, suggesting the true objective lies in some larger process already underway. The bespectacled man says his purpose has not changed since the distant past. He calls the whole situation an experiment, while behind him the armored beast-like commander begins to transform with crackling power. The blonde fighter recognizes the implication and turns in alarm toward his superior. The Grand Commander emerges altered and enraged, no longer seeming fully himself. Golden energy floods his weapon as the experiment's effect turns him into a living threat. He launches upward in a violent burst, forcing Jean and the blonde fighter to scatter from his opening strike. The blonde fighter realizes the commander has been tampered with and curses the man responsible. Charging in, he demands to know what was done to his commander. He plants himself and commits to a direct assault. The transformed commander answers with overwhelming force, bringing his weapon down on Jin's position. Jin catches the blow with his blade, preventing the commander from crushing him outright. Using the bind to create an opening, Jin drives a powered punch into the commander's body. The hit lands solidly and breaks the commander's momentum. For an instant, the commander's eyes flare as the shock of the strike cuts through the frenzy. Jin follows with a brutal kick to the chest, turning defense into a clean counterattack. The commander is blasted backward, thrown across the room by the force of the combination. Jin pursues immediately, refusing to let the transformed warrior recover. Mid-charge, Jin senses a new danger and sharpens his focus. Kagura steps in and halts Jin's advance, crossing blades with him to protect the commander and reassert himself as the true obstacle. With cold concentration, Kagura meets Jin head-on, making clear that the real confrontation has only just begun. A crushing strike lands, opening the clash with overwhelming force. The blonde swordsman realizes his opponent's strength is far beyond normal. The long-haired enemy is equally surprised that the blonde man's blade survived the impact. They break apart, resetting their positions as the fight widens. The enemy calmly shifts from combat to curiosity and begins questioning the others. When he asks whether he may destroy something, he is immediately denied. That refusal confirms his identity to the observers, who recognize exactly who stands before them. The long-haired fighter realizes they have identified him as the king's vessel. The blonde man is thrown by that title and tries to make sense of it. A bespectacled man presses the issue, asking if this being was the one who created the invader weapon, while implying he already knows the answer. The blonde swordsman follows that logic to its conclusion and understands this is not the person he thought it was. He concludes this figure only wears Kagura's appearance, and is not Kagura himself. He recalls that the things this man creates always felt wrong. He remembers the cold, clinical experiments that revealed the same in human nature. Even memories of kindness now seem false, as though the friend he knew was only a mask. Steeling himself, he accepts that the being before him is not the friend he once trusted. The vessel dismisses that judgment, saying a mind changes after living for 100 million years. He makes clear he has no interest in further discussion and intends to settle matters by force. An armored ally steps in to handle the Grand Commander, leaving the blonde swordsman to face the vessel. The vessel agrees to that arrangement, admitting the commander would be troublesome for him. The blonde man immediately launches his attack while his ally moves on the other front. The vessel slips past the commander without concern, keeping his focus on the blonde swordsman. He notices an incoming strike and turns to meet it. In that instant, he recognizes the attack too late. The blonde swordsman reveals the strike was a feint, and that the vessel has taken the bait. He follows through with the real attack, driving a sweeping blow toward the vessel. The strike erupts into a massive burst of golden power meant to finish the exchange at once. Amid the blast, the vessel makes a subtle move with his hand. The explosion tears through the chamber, but the outcome remains uncertain inside the smoke. Dust and shockwaves swallow the battlefield for a moment. From within the haze, the vessel's hair lashes out unexpectedly toward the blonde man. The blonde swordsman is caught and constricted before he can recover from his own attack. The vessel plants himself and calmly acknowledges what he has learned from that exchange. He explains that there is a reason he is called the king's vessel. The blonde man realizes in shock that even though he should have severed it, the vessel's hair endured and trapped him anyway. With his prey restrained, the vessel prepares to continue the fight on his own terms. Smiling as purple power crackles around him, he demands to be entertained.